Chapter 757. Early in the morning, while the shepherds were busy milking their cows, walking their horses, and driving their sheep to graze on the sparse grass on the barren land, Kirstine was brought to the Turkic Khagan's tent. Kirstine was still dressed in the splendid attire of a shaman. He wore a crown of pheasant feathers on his head, a colorful fur coat, a boar skin cloak on his shoulders, and a skull made of cow bones around his neck. He held a strange walking stick in his hand. The moment he entered the Khagan's tent, he discovered that the Turkic generals had already filled up the tent. Soon after, he noticed that the Tang emissary was sitting firmly on the seat of honor. Grand Shaman Kirstine's heart immediately tightened. This was not a good sign. "Khagan, I know that the Tang have sent an emissary, but I don't know if the Khagan believes his flowery words, or if he's willing to befriend us honest Khitans." Kirstine did not dare to be negligent and immediately went straight to the point, questioning Moshe. Hearing this, Yang Fan sneered. He was not the only one who sneered. Among the leaders who listened to the scout's account yesterday, there were quite a few young ones who could not keep their cool and also sneered. Kirstine's heart sank even deeper. He stared at Moshe and harshly said, "Khagan, just what did he say to you? I can swear on the name of the ancestral spirits that nothing I said to the Khagan was false." By now, Moshe had completely believed Yang Fan's words. Originally, he had wanted to tease Yang Fan by calling Uzbekistan over and have him confront Yang Fan face to face. Now that he saw Yang Fan's exasperated expression, he suddenly lost interest. Moshe indifferently said, "Grand Shaman Kirstine, since you believe that your ancestral spirits will protect you, there is no need for you to seek our cooperation. I admire your loyalty to your people, so I do not want to embarrass you. You can leave now. Take your people and leave this place immediately." The Khitans had already begun to build their base in the Ingzhou region, and they did not suffer too much on the battlefield in Hebei. Although the situation began to change with Li Duozuo's victory and the entry of Lu Shurda and Sha Zhongyi into Hebei, these generals were still led by the incompetent Wu family. The commander of the north was Wu Yi and the commander of the south was Wu Yizong. The existence of these two severely restricted the development of the Hebei battlefield to the Zhou's advantage. Even if the Turks were unwilling to ally with the Khitans would still be able to survive, though the battle would be even more confusing. If that was the case and the alliance failed, Uzbekistan could just leave in a huff. Although it would not be the icing on the cake, their situation was not too bad. But now things were different. Stan's keen senses told him that the goal of the Wuzhou envoys wasn't just to ruin their alliance, but something else. What if the Turks formed an alliance with Zhou? He had already heard that Moshe's condition for the surrender of the Heku 6 prefectures was to fight the Khitans on behalf of Wuzhou. Initially, he firmly believed that this was an excuse for the Turks to deceive Wuzhou. But when he saw the Wuzhou envoys, who was treated as an honored guest by the Turks, he no longer dared to harbor such fantasies. "If my mission cannot succeed, then I will not let you succeed." With this thought, Stan said loudly, "Even if the Khan did not say it, I could still guess it. This cunning Wuzhou envoys must have told you that we have already suffered a great defeat, that we are at the end of our rope, and even asked you to send troops to help them destroy us, right?" Stan's words hit the nail on the head, and Moshe's face immediately darkened. Yang Fan sighed inwardly. This Khitan envoy could have retreated safely. If he was a little stupid, not only could he have kept his life, he could have also sent the news back in time to warn the Khitans. Now that he has guessed the Turks' plan, how can Moshe let him go? Seeing the expressions of Moshe and the rest, Stan knew that he had unfortunately hit the nail on the head. In a moment of desperation, he blurted out, "The Tangs are cunning and cannot be trusted. Khan Moshe, have you forgotten how Li Tang bowed to you when he wanted to conquer the world during the chaos of the late Sui dynasty?" Stan's eyes bulged out in anger, and he looked around at the leaders in the tent. He said vehemently, "Li Yuan pledged allegiance to the Turks in order to get you to stand on his side. He promised that as long as you lend him your troops, You can have as much as you want from the children and wealth obtained from the war. The Tang Empire will only take the land. If you did not send your troops, as long as you did not cooperate with the other rebellious kings to attack Li Tang, we would still give you gold and jewels. When the Khan of the Turks passed away, the Tang Empire stopped the court to mourn for 3 days. All the officials in the court went to pay their respects. Whenever there was a Turk envoy, Li Yuan would personally attend a banquet and be very respectful. What happened in the end? As soon as the Tang Empire stabilized, he wanted to catch up from behind. Khan Jili deeply hated the Tang Empire and sent troops to attack. The Tang Empire was no match for them. Li Shimin emptied his treasury to bribe the Turks and promised marriage. All he wanted was to retreat. You retreated, but what happened in the end? Stan said sternly. In the end, Li Shimin only paid lip service to the Turks. On the surface, he was respectful, but he was secretly accumulating the strength of the country. Coincidentally, the Turks were in internal strife, and he took the opportunity to attack. He first destroyed the East Turks, and then the West Turks. Even your Khan Jeli and Kanishbara were captured alive. Your land became the Tang Empire's governor's office and protectorate. Stan glared at him and shouted. The sons of the Turks became the slaves of the Tang Empire. Innocent women were reduced to slaves of the Tang Empire. The Turks were forced to abandon the name of the Turks and use the name of the Tang officials. They served the Tang Emperor for more than 50 years, bowing and scraping and losing all their prestige. It was not easy for you to restore your country and become strong again. Are you going to repeat the same mistakes? Stan's words caused an uproar among the leaders in the tent. The Turks were unhappy at the mention of the bitter experiences of the Turks. Yang Fan saw that the Turks had been incited to hate the Tang by Stan's words and knew that things were not going well. While Stan was speaking, he was racking his brains for a solution. When Stan finished, Yang Fan immediately laughed and clapped his hands, saying, "Wonderful! Truly wonderful!" Maji glanced at him and saw that he was calm and smiling. He knew that he must have something to say, and the hatred he felt for Stan lessened. He wanted to hear what he had to say. Yang Fan casually said, before the Sui dynasty, the Turks were powerful. China promised marriage and treated the Turks like a distinguished guest. During the Sui dynasty, Emperor Yangjian was a great strategist. He unified the world and all sides submitted to him. Didn't the Turks do the same? When Emperor Yangguang arrived at the Yanmen Pass, the Khan of the Turks personally led the court officials to welcome him. Yangguang went to inspect the camp. The envoy was the first to lead the way. The envoy complained that the area outside the Khan's tent was not clean. The Khan personally pulled out his sword and cut the grass to show his respect to the Sui dynasty. This is the difference between the strong and the weak. At the end of the Sui dynasty, the Central Plains was in chaos. Rebellions broke out, and the Turks rose. All the rebellions in the Central Plains tried to curry favor with the Khitans, promising them wealth and people. They did everything they could to curry favor with the powerful Turks. But they are not as strong as the Turks. What else is there to say? By the time the Central Plains was unified and became stronger, the Turks had internal strife and split into the Eastern and Western Turks. The two fought endlessly, and the country's strength weakened day by day. By this time, the Tang Empire has risen. If they did not take this opportunity to attack the Turks, in my opinion, it would be unimaginable. Yang Fan laughed coldly and said, "The strong and the weak are relative. Every country has its time when it is strong, and also its time when it is weak. When it is strong, it will bully other countries. When it is weak, it will be bullied by other countries. Since ancient times, this has never been the case." The people of the grasslands who believe in the law of the jungle agree with this saying. But when it comes to themselves, they do not feel so comfortable. Yang Fan said, "Today the Khan of Mosh is a wise ruler. He has 400,000 soldiers and a territory of 10,000 miles. All the tribes in the north serve the Khan. As for the future, whether the Turks or Zhou will be stronger, It will depend on whether they have a wise ruler. It is not something you and I can decide. As the people in charge, we only need to do what we are doing. What is the current situation? Now that the Turks are on the rise, our Zhou is still a strong country, having inherited the power of the Great Tang. If the two countries fight, it will not be a good thing for either side. Once both sides suffer, others will benefit from it. Thus, the Turks and Zhou are at war. On the other hand, your Khitans— Yang Fan looked at Stan and said with a smile, "You begged for troops, groveled, and even gave a large piece of land to the Khagan. Your methods are exactly the same as us when we were weak." Yang Fan turned to Moshe and asked with a smile, "Does the Khan not feel that the Khitans' methods today are the same as when our two countries were weak? As a nomadic people, if the Khitans become strong, I wonder if the first to bear the brunt will be my Zhou or your Turks." When the generals in the tent heard this, they could not help but look at Stan with a dangerous glint in their eyes. At present, Zhou was obviously not a country that they could take over. Even if Zhou became stronger with the great desert plains, a place where no other races could survive except nomads, it was impossible for them to be their mortal enemy. Khitans were different. The Khitan submission today is like how the Khagan Khan mowed the grass for the Sui Emperor and how the Tang Emperor wore mourning clothes for the Turks. But once the Khitans become strong as nomadic people, they can rule the entire grasslands and integrate the Turks like the Xiongnu, Rouran, Xianbei, and other nomadic people into their own tribe and completely wipe them out. The Khitans have now shown their strength. This is the most dangerous enemy. Stan's face turned red and he wanted to say more. Moshe had already made a decision. He slammed his palm on the table and shouted, "Men!" A few warriors outside the tent answered and entered. Moshe pointed at Stan and said fiercely, "This Khan has long made an agreement with Zhou to form an alliance and be friends forever. This person is cunning and eloquent in order to frame us Turks as an unjust person. He deserves to be killed. Drag him out and execute him along with his followers. Leave no one alive." The bodyguards complied and dragged Stan away. Stan turned pale with fright. His walking stick was snatched away and his hands were twisted. Stan struggled with all his might. His pigskin cloak fell to the ground and the feather hat on his head tilted. He shouted at the top of his voice, "When two countries are at war, envoys are not to be executed. Moshe, you cannot break the rules. You cannot kill me." Chibikri sneered and spat at him. "The Khitans are just a vassal of Zhou. What kind of country are you?" "Bah!" Yang Fan secretly heaved a sigh of relief, but he maintained a calm expression on his face. Moshe looked around at the leaders and said in a deep voice, "I think we should fulfill our promise and cooperate with Zhou to attack the Khitans. What do the leaders think?" Chapter 758. By the time the heads of Grand Shaman Kirsten and a dozen others were hung on the poles, the Turks were already preparing to move out. Perhaps as early as 10 days ago, when the shepherds were about to move out, Moshe was already making preparations for the expedition. But the speed at which they gathered was still far more efficient than the army of the Central Plains Empire. Musie's little son, who liked to wander around, was led by his mother by the hand and hobbled to Yang Fan. Yang Fan had just finished giving instructions to Ma Qiao. Ma Qiao was to return to Hebei and report the news of the Turks' departure to lead Duozhwa so that the military there could respond in time. Meanwhile, Yang Fan was to act as a guide for the Turks and a messenger to communicate with the army around Wuzhou, accompanying Moshe's army to launch a surprise attack on Yingzhou. "You, where are you going?" The little guy was very beautiful. He had well-defined facial features and a chubby face with 2 healthy blushes. Seeing the attire of Yang Fan and the others, he stopped and tilted his head to look at them curiously before asking in a childish voice. He spoke in Turkic and Mu Hiyue translated for him with a smile. Mu Hiyue knew that they were from the Central Plains. This time, Yang Fan did not avoid the question. He bent down and patiently answered, "We are going to a place far, far away." After hearing his mother's answer, the little boy seemed to understand and nodded vigorously asking, hurting, or going to war? Muhue burst into laughter and said to Yang Fan, "My son is asking if you are going to hurting or going to war." Yang Fan could not help but laugh as well. He gently pinched the little boy's face and thought for a moment before replying, "We are going to hurting." The child was still too young. Perhaps he would grow up to be a ferocious grassland wolf, but right now he was innocent and adorable. Yang Fan was unwilling to tell him about this bloody matter. This was a grassland with a harsh climate and scarce water, other than a few large rivers that could be used for farming. Other places could only grow weeds with strong vitality. Therefore, only herdsmen could live here. If someone fantasized about turning this place into a piece of land for farming, then he would only reap the desert. The desert would turn into an earth-shattering sandstorm, and even the faraway farmlands of the Han people would be swallowed up. This world was using a precise design, ingeniously balancing everything in the world. Because of this, the people who lived in grasslands and the people who lived in the central plains fought for land that was more suitable for survival. Yang Fan did not know if they would be able to live in peace one day. If the enemy attacked again, he or his descendants would still hold the sword in their hands tightly. But at this moment, he did not hesitate to show a friendly smile to a child. The little fellow smiled sweetly and showed off to him in a childish voice, "I'm also a nomad. I move around a lot." After saying that, he suddenly seemed to have made a big discovery. He turned to his mother and asked, "Why do we keep moving?" It might be difficult to explain this question to a child. Muhue thought for a moment and then answered seriously, "The earth is the mother of all of us. It feeds us. If we live in one place for a long time, Mother Earth will feel uncomfortable. Plants will not grow and herds of animals will disappear. If we keep moving, like blood flowing, Mother Earth will feel comfortable." She pinched the tip of her son's nose and said with a smile, "It's like when you massage Mother's back. If you keep patting up and down, Mother Earth will feel comfortable. But if you only hit one place, will Mother Earth feel uncomfortable?" The little fellow nodded as if he understood. Yang Fan did not understand the conversation between the mother and son. He saw Musi shouting something in the distance. He was riding on a horse. The child turned his head and saw his father. He jumped up with a smile and impatiently pulled his mother's hand and walked away. Soon he was sitting on the back of the horse, carried by his father, and galloped to the flat grassland. Yang Fan looked at the family with a smile. Maybe one day they would have to fight each other, but at least at this moment they were in harmony. Not far away, a miserable cry was heard. It was a sheep that was about to be slaughtered by its master and become food for its master on the long journey. Perhaps it was born in this world under the care of its owner. In the summer nights, in order to prevent the lamb from falling into the belly of the wolf, he gripped his saber tightly. In the winter, in order to prevent the lamb from starving to death, he spared no effort in searching for weeds, but his ultimate goal was to survive. As a philosopher of the grassland said, "You will not die because you are guilty, and we will not live to starve." From Yang Fan's point of view, he said, "You have your reasons to plunder for survival, but I have my responsibility to fight for what I protect." The long journey began. The astonishing speed of the army finally allowed Yang Fan to understand how terrifying the nights of the grassland were. Their will to survive was so strong, and their vitality was so vigorous in the bitter cold environment. Perhaps they were the incarnation of weeds. Yang Fan and Gu Zhuting were both skilled in martial arts and had abnormally strong bodies. But compared to the knights who had adapted to the life of the grassland, it was useless. Soon, the two of them felt like all the bones in their bodies had been broken. Even wearing such thick clothes, the inside of their thighs had become red and swollen, and the moment they mounted their horses, they felt excruciating pain. It was to the extent that the Turks had no choice but to borrow a cart from a small tribe along the way to pull them along. These Turks drank a bowl of horse milk every day and gnawed on a few pieces of tough, dried meat before they could continue on their journey. On the other hand, Yang Fan and Gu Zhuting had not eaten a bowl of hot porridge for 3 days straight, and their stomachs could no longer take it. But they still gritted their teeth and persevered, unwilling to slow down the advance of the army. The earlier the army arrived, the earlier the war in the Hebei province would end, and the earlier one less comrade would die on the battlefield in Hebei. Perhaps every second they bought would determine the life and death of many people. After traveling day and night, the Turkic cavalry finally arrived at the Songma commandery. The Songma commandery had been set up to manage the various Khitan tribes, but at this time it only existed in name. Of the 8 Khitan tribes, Li Jinzhong's and Sun Wanrong's had rebelled, and Li Jinzhong was the commander-in-chief of the Songma commandery. Of the 8 Khitan tribes, Li Jinzhong's was the strongest, followed by Sun Wanrong's. Because of Li Jinzhong's strength, his tribe had always been the leader of the Khitan tribal alliance. However, the 8 Khitan tribes were still far from the centralization of power that Yalua Beo had achieved in his later life. At this time, the leader of the tribal alliance had limited control over the entire tribe. The internal affairs of the tribes were handled by the tribes themselves, and the alliance leader had no authority to make decisions on his own. Li Jinzhong and Sun Wanrong had rebelled, and while the other 6 tribes were dissatisfied with the domineering and oppressive behavior of the generals around Wu, they did not have the courage to join in the rebellion. This was a spontaneous action by Li Jinzhong and Sun Wanrong, so the other 6 tribes continued to live in their own territories, adopting a neutral attitude toward the rebellion of the imperial court and Sun Wanrong. The sudden assault of the 50,000 Turkic cavalry on the Songma commandery immediately caused the 6 Khitan tribes to feel uneasy. The chiefs of the 6 tribes urgently gathered their troops and prepared for battle. At this time, Yang Fan came into play. He immediately took the token that Li Duozhua had given him and urgently called on the chiefs of the 6 tribes to inform them of the Turks' intentions. The chiefs of the 6 tribes had all been appointed provincial governors by the imperial court, so they were no strangers to the seal of the imperial court. After confirming Yang Fan's identity, the chiefs of the 6 tribes were caught between a rock and a hard place. They were not optimistic about Li Jinzhong and Sun Wanrong's rebellion, so even when Li Jinzhong and Sun Wanrong defeated the great Zhou army and became famous, they had not been tempted and had restrained their troops from participating in the rebellion. But on the other hand, the border generals' plundering and oppression of them had left them with bitter hatred. They were well aware that whether Li Jinzhong and Sun Wanrong's rebellion succeeded or failed, it would still be beneficial to them. This was because Li Jinzhong's rebellion would ensure that the imperial court would not dare to act so brazenly against them for a very long time. Thus, in their hearts, Li Jinzhong and Sun Wanrong were the great heroes of their tribes. At the moment, the main forces of Li Jinzhong and Sun Wanrong's forces were fighting in the southern part of the Hebei province, and their old, weak women and children were in the rear. Because of the cold winter, the new city had not yet been completed. Once the 50,000 Turks arrived, their defeat would be assured. These old, weak women and children were the parents, wives, and children of the volunteer army. If they were captured, the army at the front would collapse without a fight. But the Turkic army had already arrived. If they wanted to protect the old and children of Li Jinzhong and Sun Wanrong, the only way was for the 6 tribes to participate in the war. But once they did, they would not only have to face the ferocious armies of the Turks, but they would also be participating in Li Jinzhong's rebellion. When the imperial court quelled the rebellion in the future, how could it let them off so easily? The chiefs of the 6 tribes discussed for an entire day without reaching a conclusion. On the second day, the highly respected elders of the 6 tribes also participated in the meeting, but there was still no conclusion. On the third day, Seljuk and Chebekri lost their patience. They brought out the 50,000 cavalry and placed them in front of the Duhua tribe and Fenwen tribe of the 6 Khitan tribes, giving them a final warning. If you don't let us pass, we will meet on the battlefield. In truth, the Raolu commandery was adjacent to the Songma commandery, and the Raolu commandery was where the 10 major Shi tribes resided. The Shi king had also participated in the war and was an accomplice of Li Jinzhong and Sun Wanrong. But at this point in the war, the Shi king's role had been minimal. It seemed that the Shi king's determination to rebel against Zhou was not firm. Thus, even though they would be leaving their backs to the Shi tribe if they fought with the 6 Khitan tribes, the Turks were not worried. As expected, the most powerful thing was still military might. The 6 Khitan tribes discussed for 2 days without reaching a conclusion. On the 3rd day, Chebakri placed his troops in front of them, and the chiefs and elders of the 6 tribes, who had been arguing furiously, finally lowered their heads in the face of the pressure of a great army. Chebakri grew impatient and was about to order his men to blow the horn to prepare to attack when the Khitans sent someone out of the camp to express their opinion to the later Zhou envoy and the Turkic generals. We agree to let them pass, and we will not interfere with the movements of the Turkic soldiers on the route to Li Jinzhong and Sun Wanrong's tribes. But they had 2 requests. First, they could let them pass, but the Turkic soldiers were not to take the opportunity to plunder the people of their tribes along the route. They would gather their soldiers and prepare for battle. It seemed that the Turks' act of peace with later Zhou, immediately falling out, and raiding Hebei had completely ruined the credibility of the Turks. Second, they would maintain their neutrality and would not follow Yang Fan's request to provide the Turkic army with a guide. But Yang Fan only needed them to be willing to let them pass. As for guides, they were not willing to send anyone. There were still many Han in the area, and some of them had even served in the border army. Yang Fan quickly found 2 local Han who were willing to lead the way. 50,000 cavalry charged straight for Sun Wanrong's new city. From start to finish, the Shi king did not send a single soldier to stop them. On the contrary, when he learned that the Turks had launched a surprise attack on Sun Wanrong's rear, the Shi king hurriedly issued an order for all his troops to immediately withdraw. It seemed that he was going to cease all activities. Chapter 759. Northwest of Yingzhou, a barren land. This place was known as Tongliao in later generations. There was no name for it, and no one had settled down there. But now there were, and that was the tens of thousands of women and children under Li Jinzhong and Sun Wanrong. This place was relatively high in the north and south, and low in the middle, shaped like a saddle. To the north were the rocky mountains and hills of the southern foothills of the greater Kinganling Mountains. To the south were the shallow mountains and loess hills at the edge of the Liaoxi Mountains. The middle was the sandy alluvial plains of the Liao River Basin. The place that Li Jinzhong had chosen was quite good. It could be defended by the mountains, and they could plant and graze in front of the mountains. They could also hunt in the mountains. And if something happened, they could retreat in any direction. It was a good buffer zone. Their city was built in the most dangerous place in the Rocky Mountains in the north, Eagle's Mouth. There were only a few trees on this mountain, and most of the places were bare rocky mountains. Behind them was a continuous mountain range, and in front of them was a towering mountain peak. There was only one dangerous path that led up the mountain. It was indeed like the sharp beak of an eagle, easy to defend and hard to attack. The chief commander stationed here was Sun Wanrong's brother-in-law, Yuanyu, and the deputy commander was Fei Mo. Because they had no experience in building a city, and it was inconvenient to build in the winter, and because there were only injured soldiers and elderly and young in the tribe, the construction progress of the new city was very slow, even though they had captured some people to work as laborers. The new city on Eagle's Mouth had not yet taken shape. The entire tribe still lived at the foot of the mountain, but most of the property and food they had captured were stored on the mountain. Early in the morning, the half-grown children in the tribe began to herd the few sheep on the dry, grassy slope facing the sun, while the women carried wrought tin baskets on their backs and went into the forest to pick pine nuts and other fruits. The elderly were also busy in the tribe, sewing leather clothes, raising livestock, or doing other kinds of work. Some of the able-bodied men and the captured laborers went up the mountain to continue building their city of hope. On the slope facing the sun, there were blue skies, white clouds, white snow, withered grass, a herd of goats, and a group of children herding goats. The one walking in front was a boy with his hands in his sleeves and a whip under his ribs. He was about 8 or 9 years old. His hair was messy like a bird's nest, and his sleeves were shiny like ice. There were 4 or 5 children following behind him, both boys and girls, and they were all younger than him. The boy proudly pointed at a female sheep with a big belly and said, "Lon Lon, come here. Look, that sheep is about to give birth. All the sheep I raise are fat, and in the tribe my sheep love to give birth the most." The group of little kids couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. The little girl named Lon Lon said in admiration, "Big Brother Jijan is so awesome. What are you going to do when you grow up?" Jijan raised his sleeves and slid the shiny sleeves under his nose, leaving a wet mark on his lips. "You're still herding sheep when you've grown up." Herding sheep? Herding sheep for what? To earn money, to marry a wife. Why would he marry a wife? Let's have babies. What's the point of having a baby? Jijan grew impatient. He glared at her and said, "What else can I do? Herding sheep." Lon Lon mumbled, "What's the point of herding sheep? I don't like herding sheep." Just as Jijan was about to speak, he suddenly tilted his head and paused. He listened intently for a moment before asking, "Lon Lon, what sound do you hear?" Lon Lon was confused. "What sound?" As soon as these words were spoken, the faint rumbling became clearer, and the 2 children looked down the hill at the snowy plain. They saw thousands upon thousands of men and horses, stretching as far as the eye could see, like a tide of gray ants, rapidly advancing, covering everything in sight. The tide of ants swept across the plains in front of them like a gust of wind, not stopping for even a moment for them. Jijan's mouth was agape, and the whip under his ribs fell to the ground. Drums and horns sounded, and the army was like a tide. The Khitan warriors who had hurriedly organized to protect their tribesmen tried their best to fend off the attacks from the Turks, but the Turks outnumbered them 10 to 1. No matter how hard they tried, the waves of Turk cavalry closing in on them from all directions continued to press down on them, causing their defensive circle to shrink. The enemy had come too suddenly. The mountain city had not been built yet, so it was not enough to fend off the enemy. The entire tribe was camped at the foot of the hill, unable to escape in time. With nowhere to retreat, they could only fight. The entire mountain was filled with clashing cavalry, and the valley was filled with deafening battle cries. The plains were covered in corpses and blood. The Khitan, who were at a severe disadvantage in numbers, had their formation disrupted by the Turks. They were cut up and beaten up, and some had already abandoned their weapons and surrendered. If they did not surrender now, only death awaited them. It was impossible to change the situation. Eunu and Famo had also been separated in the chaos. He could only lead his tribesmen to break out of the encirclement. The spear in Famo's hand was already broken, and the saber he had pulled out was already bent. His back was drenched in sweat, and he was panting for breath. But no matter which direction he charged in, there was only wave after wave of enemy cavalry that seemed endless. Yang Fan and Gu Zhuting stood on a high slope, looking down at the chaotic slaughter before them. The sky was like a dome, pure and blue, like a piece of translucent blue crystal. The only white cloud in the sky was suspended alone, looking around at the vast expanse of land, silent and desolate. And beneath this eternal tranquility was a battle scene of all colors, people shouting, horses neighing, blood flying. On the slope, one could clearly see the Khitan cavalry who had been cut apart. They were like a school of startled fish, swimming around in panic and dodging. But the Turks were like water, embracing them no matter where they fled. Those who killed and those who were killed were all foreigners, but as he stood on the slope and sorrowfully looked at all this, Yang Fan felt a kind of sorrow. He was not an emperor, so he had never had the lofty resolve to sacrifice his own tribesmen for the sake of a great cause that would last for generations to come. It seemed like a good thing for the Turks to end the Khitan rebellion, but reality was not like this. His tribesmen had not died as a result. The Khitans had rebelled against Zhou, but the ones besieging them were the Turks. Was the imperial court really that weak? Definitely not. The imperial court had stationed troops in the western regions, using the strength of a single country to resist the two powerful militaries of Tibet and the Turks, but they had not gained any advantage. Although Wang Xiaojia had seized the 4 garrisons of Anqi partly because of the internal strife in Tibet, it was enough to prove the strength of the Zhou army. But in these battles, the imperial court had used veteran generals who had been guarding the borders for many years and had rich experience on the battlefield. In the eyes of the Khitan rebellion, perhaps the imperial court had thought that it would be too easy to quell. In order to seize the credit, it had sent Wu Yi, Wu Yizong, and a few other incompetent generals who had only climbed up by clinging to the Wu clan. In the end, the imperial court had sacrificed so many soldiers, and in the end, it still had to seek help from the Turks. Yang Fan had succeeded. He had won this war, but he was not happy at all. As a soldier, he felt humiliated, but he also felt helpless. The commanders of the armies in the north and south were both members of the Wu clan, and the empress had refused to relinquish power. If she had not used such drastic measures and allowed those two to blindly command, who knew how long the chaos in Hebei would have lasted? Under the constant destruction of the Khitans, the people of the north, who were already poorer than the people of the south, would have no way of surviving. The imperial court would have to sacrifice many young men to offset the foolishness of those two commanders and obtain victory in this war. Fei Mo had gone berserk. The saber in his hand transformed into arcs of cold light. He spurred on his steed and led dozens of warriors across the plains like a gust of wind, desperately trying to break out of the encirclement. The whistling of the saber brought with it endless slaughter and death. There were dozens of warriors following behind him. In addition to those who had been with him at the beginning, there were also some knights who were fighting for their own cause. Along the way, people kept falling off their horses, and people kept coming in to replace them. In the end, they forcefully opened up a path of blood and just happened to rush towards the place where Yang Fan was standing. At the bottom of the slope, there was a group of Turkic knights. In the middle of them was an old general with a long beard. He was the arrowhead, Su Mumu. Seeing that the group of fish that had escaped the net were charging at him, Su Mumu waved his hand, and the knights behind him immediately sent out a group of men to form a triangular formation and charge at Fei Mo Wu, a long saber, wrapped in a chilling sound, slashed towards Fei Mo in the air. Fei Mo was alarmed. He hurriedly urged his steed to take 2 steps to the side, avoiding the edge of the other party's attack. He then raised his curled saber, because the other party's second saber was already following him like a shadow, slashing at his head. After 100 battles, Fei Mo's strength was already exhausted, and this strike was hastily blocked. As the 2 blades collided, a kung sound rang out. Fei Mo couldn't withstand it, and the blade in his hand was sent flying. His opponent flipped his wrist, and the 3rd blade swept towards his neck like a waterfall. Fei Mo had no time to dodge. He closed his eyes and muttered, "It's over." With a clang, his fatal strike was blocked. The Turkic knight didn't have the time to look carefully. When he saw that someone had raised a saber to block his attack, he thought that it was an enemy. Without even looking, he swung his saber back at the rider. The rider seemed to be one with his horse, his horsemanship adept and his saber refined. The saber in his hand flashed back and forth, its ferocity infused with ingenious transformations. Dang, dang, dang. After several slashes, the Turkic rider felt his wrist jolt as the face of the saber struck him. His arm instantly went numb as if he had been electrocuted, and his saber flew out of his hand. Stop! By this time, Fei Mo's subordinates had also been killed or captured by the fresh Turkic army, leaving less than 4 people to put up a stubborn resistance. With Xiao Mumu's order, the Turks immediately retreated, allowing the 4 of them to retreat to Fei Mo's side with lingering fear. I said that if there's a chance, I'll let you go. As Yang Fan spoke, he glanced at Xiao Mumu. Xiao Mumu immediately waved his hand, and the saber-wielding guards retreated a few more steps. Fei Mo's body trembled. At this moment, only the outline of Yang Fan's face remained, so he shouldn't have been able to recognize him. But when he heard those words, he immediately knew who it was. He recognized Yang Fan's voice, and he was even more familiar with this promise. Fei Mo asked in shock, "It's you? Why are you here? How did you?" Fei Mo stood there in a daze. He couldn't understand why Yang Fan would appear here. Yang Fan cut him off. "Do you think that this is a place to chat? You can leave now." The fighting on the plains was still ongoing. Fei Mo turned his head and glanced at his tribesmen, who were still struggling for their lives. Yang Fan said, "I can only let you go this time. If you want to kill your way back, you'll only be bringing your brothers to their deaths, and that won't help. If you're willing to leave, I can make the decision to let these people go." After a moment of hesitation, Fei Mo reluctantly nodded his head. With a fierce whistle, he urged his horse to gallop south. The 4 horsemen immediately followed, and the prisoners were also released. They mounted their horses and followed Fei Mo. Their long years of living in a difficult environment had taught them to make choices. Xiao Mumu kicked his stirrups and slowly strolled to Yang Fan's side. With a faint smile, he said, releasing one person and throwing the entire army into chaos. "Esteemed envoy truly has good methods." Yang Fan faintly smiled. He first silently observed the chaotic battlefield, then turned his gaze to the motionless white cloud in the sky, thinking to himself, "It's time for the heavens to change." Chapter 760. While the 50,000 Turkic cavalry were still a day away from reaching the Songma commandery, Ma Qiao had already arrived in Yuzhou with several dozen elite soldiers. When Lu Shirda received the news from Ma Qiao, he immediately sent a letter to Wu Yui, who still held nearly half of the army and refused to hand over his authority, as well as to Shatsu Zhongyi, who was fighting on the southern front, and Li Duozhua, who was on the eastern front. The armies began to move at the same time and set up ambushes on all sides. As soon as the armies were mobilized, Fei Mo rushed to Sun Wanrong's encampment at Green Dragon Bay. When Sun Wanrong heard that the new city had been attacked, that his parents and family had fallen into enemy hands, that his brother-in-law Yuanyu was missing, and that all the resources and weapons he had seized over the last few months had fallen into the hands of the Turks, he felt as if he had been struck by lightning. He was already old and spent his days on the run. His body and mind were exhausted, and when he heard this news, he felt a sweetness in his throat and vomited a mouthful of blood. By the time he woke up, the situation was already hopeless. While he had been unconscious, the news had already spread throughout the army. Those Khitan warriors who had followed Fei Mo out of the encirclement had no idea how much of a blow this matter had dealt to the morale of the army. Just like when they had fought with other tribes over water and pastures, they quickly and directly told their tribesmen what had happened. They even added oil to the fire, making the situation of their tribesmen even more miserable and the Turks even more savage. Their goal was actually very simple: to incite the hatred of their tribesmen so that they could fight their way back to Yingzhou and save their loved ones. But they were no longer nomadic herdsmen, but an army on an expedition. They were not surrounded by herds of cattle and sheep that could be taken care of by just 2 people, but by the great Zhou army that was like tigers and wolves waiting for them. This news had ruined them. Just as Yang Fan had said, "We can afford to lose, but once you lose, there will be no room for redemption." This so-called army had no strict discipline, no military accomplishments nurtured by their long years in the army. In a favorable battle, they were like wolves and tigers, all of them vying to be the first, but once they encountered a major setback, they immediately became a pile of loose sand. Even if every one of them was very brave, they could not display the fighting power that an army should have. When Sun Wanrong woke up and found out that the entire army had heard the bad news, he knew that the situation was hopeless. Even though Sun Wanrong knew that he would be intercepted by the army of the imperial court on his way back, he could not make any other decision. Many of the generals beat their chests and stomped their feet, roaring furiously as they expressed their desire to kill their way back to Ing province. Sun Wanrong could not reverse the situation on his own, so he was forced to make a decision that he knew was wrong. Choose the shortest path, travel day and night, and kill our way back to Ing province. Li Duozhua had already set up an ambush in front of them. First, he ambushed them on the path that they had to pass through. Then he retreated to the defensive line that he had set up earlier. Both sides fought for a day and a night, and Shatsa Zhongyi led his army to surround them from behind. Fortunately, most of Sun Wanrong's cavalry was strong, so he didn't wait for the loyal Shatsa to form an encirclement. He jumped out of the heavy encirclement and advanced westward. In the end, he ran into Fatty Lu's army in Yutian. After one battle, he suffered heavy casualties. Sun Wanrong only led about 20,000 cavalry to bypass Yang and run northeast. At this time, he was no longer thinking about returning to rescue his tribesmen, but how to preserve his remaining armed forces. In the end, he bypassed Yang and had just crossed the Great Wall when he was hit by another blow. The Shi people had ambushed him. When the Shi king learned that the Turks had allied with the great Zhou dynasty and raided Sun Wanrong's old nest, he immediately withdrew his troops in shock. He summoned a group of strategists for an emergency discussion and decided to surrender to the imperial court. In order to atone for his previous crimes, he had to render meritorious service. As a result, he once again sent out his troops. However, the Shi soldiers who had originally cooperated with Sun Wanrong had now become his enemy. Sun Wanrong had never imagined that the Shi king would be a fence-sitter. After a fierce battle, his troops were all scattered. Sun Wanrong led his troops and fled west, attempting to pass through the vast plains of Shi and return to the Khitan's territory. Who would have thought that he would run into the chief of the divine army, Yang Xuanji? Yang Xuanji had accompanied Wu Yi to the north, but as soon as Wu Yi arrived in Hebei, he ran into the city to hide and refused to come out again. Several of his generals were also restrained by him, not allowing them to act blindly without thinking. Yang Xuanji had no choice but to stay in Danzhou to rest and build up his strength. This time, with Lu Shirda's military letter stating that the Khitan's old nest had been raided. The morale of the army was in chaos. Previously, there was also Wu Zetian's imperial edict reprimanding them. Combining the two, Wu Yi made up his mind to send several of his generals to participate in the encirclement and suppression. Yang Xuanji was one of the troops. Sun Wanrong was blocked head-on and fled east. In the end, he ran into another group of troops under Wu Yi's command. The general of the troops was the chief of the vanguard, Zhang Jujia. At this time, the Khitan troops were completely terrified and had no desire to continue fighting. After the two sides fought for a while, Sun Wanrong led his troops and fled again. In the vast wilderness, there seemed to be troops lying in ambush everywhere. In his panic, Sun Wanrong didn't know which way to go, so he took whatever path he could find. As a result, the further he went, the further away he was from Yingzhou. At dusk, Sun Wanrong led the remnants of his troops to set up camp under a pine forest. After taking stock of his troops, several of his generals had been separated. The bravest general under him, Luo Wuzhen, had killed his way somewhere in the chaos. At this time, there were less than 3,000 people left by his side, and almost all of them were injured. Seeing this scene, Sun Wanrong couldn't help but cry. When the moon rose above the willow tree, Fei Mo, who had gone out to gather information, returned. He found several families of mountain people in a nearby call and found out that they had escaped to Lu County, modern Tongzhou, only a step away from Yuzhou. After listening to Fei Mo's report, Sun Wanrong couldn't help but fall silent. Now that the night is dark, he may still be able to hide for a while. Tomorrow morning, it will be as difficult as ascending to heaven if he still wants to escape. As expected, the great Zhou army has already sealed all the routes to the north. In the forest, A bonfire burned bleakly. The red light of the fire could not conceal Sun Wanrong's pale face. Sparks danced in the air. When they brushed against one's face, they would turn into white ash. Sun Wanrong sat there without moving, his hair soon covered with a layer of burnt ash, as if it was covered with a layer of frost. Fei Emo looked at the silent Sun Wanrong and said uneasily, "Grand Marshal, what should we do now? Our brothers are at a loss. We still need Grand Marshal to make a decision before we can decide what to do." Sun Wanrong silently shook his head and sadly said, "Today I want to surrender to Tang, but more than 200,000 Tang soldiers have died in my hands. If I surrender to Tang, I will die without a doubt. If I go to the Turks, they are in a dilemma. They can tolerate others, but they definitely can't tolerate me. If I want to go to Xinluo, Li Duozuo's troops have already blocked the route to the east. There is no way I can survive this trip. If I want to return to Yingzhou, the new city has already been plundered. In order to protect themselves, the other 6 tribes will definitely not tolerate me. Where else can I go? Where else can I go?" Sun Wanrong used all his strength to break a withered branch in his hand into 2 with a kacha sound. Fei Emo opened her mouth, but no words came out. Fei Emo silently sat down beside him and turned back to look at the exhausted soldiers resting against the trees in the forest. She sighed deeply. Sun Wanrong raised his head and looked at the bright moon in the sky. The frosty moonlight reflected on his beard, which was trembling slightly in the wind. After being in a daze for a while, Sun Wanrong finally said, "The 8 Khitan tribes all have different intentions. If not for that, whether it's the Tang or the Turks, how can they defeat me so easily? If the 6 Khitan tribes that stayed in Yingzhou could protect our tribesmen on the basis that we are of the same tribe, how could we have suffered such a crushing defeat?" He shook his head with a bitter smile and turned to Fei Emo. He solemnly said, "Fei Emo, remember, if the 8 Khitan tribes cannot be unified, no matter how hard it is, we cannot raise our flags and rebel. That will only bring us a disaster. If we Khitan want to stand up, the 8 tribes must unite and clench our fists. Yes, I will remember Grand Marshal's words." Fei Emo finished speaking and then said embarrassedly, "But Grand Marshal should be instructing Luo Wuzhen, Hiaxiao, and the others. I am not qualified to listen to Grand Marshal's teachings. Don't belittle yourself. No one is born a hero." Sun Wanrong patted his shoulder. "Hiaxiao, Luo Wuzhen, and the others have been scattered. I don't even know if they can survive. I can only tell you these words now." He slowly stood up and took a deep breath. Suddenly he shouted, "Men!" Although they had been fighting and running for a whole day, the clansmen were all exhausted. Sun Wanrong shouted in a deep voice, and a few leaders and bodyguards beside him quickly appeared in front of him. Sun Wanrong stared at Fei Emo and suddenly drew his saber. He placed it on Fei Emo's shoulder and said in a deep voice, "Kneel!" "Grand Marshal!" Although Fei Emo was confused, he still obediently knelt in front of Sun Wanrong. Sun Wanrong said solemnly, "You are the chief of the Daila tribe. Although Daila is a small tribe of my tribe, the warriors of your tribe have always been good at fighting and brave. It is a famous warrior tribe of my tribe. Now, I hand over my tribe and the Koggans to you. You will protect and lead them." Fei Emo opened his mouth in shock and only reacted after a long while. He said in panic, No, Grand Marshal, I can't. I don't have the ability to manage such a big tribe." Sun Wanrong smiled bitterly and said, "How big can it be? Our tribe doesn't have many people left. If the 3 tribes don't unite at this time, we'll be annexed by other tribes sooner or later." He roused his spirits and said, "Listen, I will now merge my tribe and Li Jinzhong's tribe into your Daila tribe. You must let this new tribe settle down and prosper. You must continue to grow stronger until you have the strength to unify the 8 Khitan tribes." Fei Emo was at a loss and said slowly, How can I do that? I can't." Sun Wanrong said resolutely, If you can't do it, there is still your son. If your son can't do it, there is still your grandson. Take my order as your ancestors' teachings and pass it down to your descendants. One day, your family will have a descendant who is both wise and brave and can complete my mission today. Fay Amos said in a daze, Grand Marshal, we are now surrounded, and it is hard to say whether we will survive or not. As for the future, let's talk about it after we break out of the encirclement. The corner of Sun Wanrong's mouth revealed a trace of a sly smile. I will settle the matter at hand. This is also the last thing I will do for you as your chief. I will use my death to exchange for your lives. Remember, I will be killed by you. Only by doing so will you be pardoned by the imperial court and be granted land so that our people can live in peace. The chiefs were all shocked and raised their heads to look at him. Grand Marshal, a few of them reacted quickly and were about to pounce on him. You must do as I say. Don't let my death be in vain. Sun Wanrong's voice was sonorous and resounding, like the sound of metal and stone. As soon as he finished speaking, he didn't wait for anyone to react. The long saber in his hand suddenly turned and slashed across his own throat. Chapter 761. A long-distance carriage slowly entered Zhaozhou City. With the end of the war-torn Zhaozhou City had regained some of its vitality. At this moment, Zhaozhou City was still dilapidated and withered. Less than 1/10 of the formerly bustling streets had been restored to business, and a large number of refugees had not yet returned to the north. As the temperature gradually warmed, the icicles under the eaves dripped with melted ice water, and the snow on the streets had been trampled and mixed with the mud, appearing especially dirty. But a hint of serenity and joy could be seen on the faces of the people. They no longer hurried on with their heads lowered, no longer were their eyes filled with confusion and fear. No longer were their brows tightly furrowed. Even if their clothes were ragged, if they were fellow countrymen meeting on the streets, they would still smile and excitedly embrace each other. Humans were not afraid of suffering, but what they feared most was a lack of hope. As long as they were given hope, they would have the courage and confidence to live on. Yang Fan, who was sitting in the car, was sincerely happy to see this scene. He was one of the people who had created hope for these people. Perhaps he had played almost no role on the battlefield and had not killed many enemies, but he had used his wisdom to play a role that even an army of 100,000 could not match. Seeing this scene, the frustration and humiliation that the eagle's beak felt when he had personally witnessed the decisive battle between the Khitans and the Turks on the territory of Wuzhou had greatly lessened. His empire had fallen into serious internal strife due to the struggle for the throne, and could not use all its strength to protect its people for the time being. At this time, even if he had to use some tricks and make some concessions, as long as the people who paid taxes and provided for this vast empire could have a path of survival and hope, he was willing to sacrifice his dignity as a man. The face of an emperor, a general, or minister was nothing compared to the belly of the people. Also sitting in the carriage were Anu and Gu Zhuding. Anu did not avoid suspicion and sat close to Yang Fan, leaning on his shoulder as they looked out the window. This was her man, her support. If she did not sit next to him, who else could she sit next to? Gu Zhuding, on the other hand, was sitting far away, so far that it was a little deliberate. Fortunately, Anu's mind was completely focused on Yang Fan, so she didn't notice her master's strange behavior. The sage said, "If you have enough food and clothing, you will know honor and disgrace." It was true. Under the harsh living conditions on the grassland, Gu Zhuding could not treat herself as a woman. If she did not sleep together, she would be frozen into a popsicle. If she did not have her hair and face dirty, she could only use up the precious snow water. Thus, everything she did there was natural and expected. However, when she returned to the civilized world and recalled everything, she felt shy and embarrassed. Fortunately, Yang Fan did not do anything special, or she would be even more ashamed. Anu and Gu Zhuding were women. Although the war was not completely over, they could leave at any time if they wanted to. Yang Fan, on the other hand, was a little more troublesome. He was a soldier, but the war in the north had come to an end. The great Zhou army was besieging the Khitans who had escaped, so there was no big battle to fight. Whether Yang Fan could leave or not depended on the words of the high-ranking generals. Whether it was Li Duozhua or Lu Shurda, they were all very familiar with Yang Fan and had a good relationship with him. So Yang Fan left. He went deep into the tiger's den and successfully completed the mission of borrowing soldiers, ending the Khitan rebellion before the arrival of spring, thus preventing the chaotic war situation from destroying the spring plowing in Hebei. Otherwise, the lives of the people in Hebei would be worse in the coming year. Yang Fan could be said to have made a great contribution. If he stayed in Hebei at this time, it would undoubtedly be more advantageous for him after the war. But this was no longer important to him. For him now, too high a position was actually not conducive to his development. So at this moment, Yang Fan had a bit of a carefree feeling of brushing his clothes and leaving after the matter is done, hiding his achievements and fame. We've arrived at the inn. Let's rest for a while and continue our journey tomorrow. When the carriage stopped, Yang Fan looked back at Anu and Gu Zhuting with a smile. Anu nodded sweetly. After experiencing the pain of being separated by life and death, as long as her man could return safely, as long as she could snuggle up to him like this and smell his scent, she would be satisfied. Gu Zhuting dodged Yang Fan's gaze a little. When she walked out of the carriage, her slender feet in deerskin boots stomped on the ground a few times. Because of the long journey, there was no snow on her boots. She just wanted to use this small action to stomp away the annoyance in her heart, because she found that she was a little afraid of this little man. With a smile, Yang Fan said to the innkeeper, "Innkeeper, 2 superior rooms." Around the carriage, there were a few people dressed like merchants who also dismounted and walked into the inn. Yang Fan knew that they were the people sent by the succession hall to protect his safety. When Anu stayed in the 1,000 gold smelter, the sovereign's bodyguards came to find him. However, Yang Fan was still an official, and there were still many scouts from the imperial court, the Turks, and even the surrounding tribes in Hebei. In order to avoid being noticed, Yang Fan could only ask them to be his bodyguards in secret, and did not allow them to openly follow him. When the innkeeper saw that the guest had arrived, he hurriedly and attentively received him. He called the waiter over and welcomed the guest in. After being repeatedly looted, the so-called superior rooms here were only slightly cleaner and more spacious, and nothing else. Yang Fan knew that Zhaozhou City had been severely damaged during the war, and it was impossible for there to be any high-class restaurants at this moment. He could only settle his dinner in this inn. Therefore, after washing up and changing his clothes, he went to the guest hall. After a while, Anu and Gu Zhuting also finished washing up and changing their clothes and came to his table. Yang Fan nodded to them and asked them to order a few dishes from the menu in front of the counter, while he continued to listen to the discussion of the people at the table next to him. At the table next to them, a middle-aged merchant said to them in a serious tone, "I advise you it's best to wait for things to settle down before going back. It's better not to go north right now." Those people were well dressed, and it seemed that they were rich people from the north who had fled to the south during the war. Now that the war was over, they were on their way back to the north, and they happened to meet their fellow countrymen from the north. One of them, who looked like a rich gentleman, asked anxiously, "Why can't we go back now? We still have to wait for things to settle down. Could it be that the Khitans are still running rampant?" The middle-aged merchant waved his hand and said with a bitter smile, "The Khitans are no longer a threat. But have you heard that the Lord of Hanoi, Wu Yizong, has arrived in Yuzhou?" A middle-aged man spat fiercely and said, "That pig-riding general, I spit on him." When the Khitans were arrogant, he ran away as soon as he heard the slightest news, running away faster than a dam rabbit. When the Khitans lost the war, he couldn't wait to run north, afraid that he wouldn't be able to seize the credit in time. Another person was somewhat confused and said, "So what if he arrived in Yuzhou? He's a man of our imperial court, not a Khitan." The middle-aged merchant sighed and said, "He's not a Khitan, but he's even more ruthless than them. Have you heard of the Khitan general Hioxio? Among the Khitans, he's the most bloodthirsty." Now the elders in the north rank Wu Yizong and Hioxio together as the two he's, saying, "Only these two he's have killed the most people." The aristocrats looked at each other in dismay and said in bewilderment, "The Khitans have harmed us quite a bit, so what's wrong with him killing them a bit more ruthlessly?" The middle-aged merchant spat fiercely and said, "Who do you think he killed? How could there be so many Khitans for him to kill? Those who should escape have escaped, those who should die have died, or those who should have surrendered to the other generals." Wu Yizong rushed over, but it's a pity that he hid too far away. By the time he arrived, there were already no Khitans for him to capture. Without heads, how can he report the credit? The middle-aged merchant coldly glared at his obstinate fellow countrymen and said fiercely, "Then he'll just point fingers at the good for stealing." When Wu Yizong arrived in Yuzhou, he immediately massacred the commoners of the cities that had been occupied by the Khitans for a long time, saying that they were collaborating with bandits and finance bandits. He killed an entire family, regardless of gender or age. The more the middle-aged merchant spoke, the angrier he became. He said, "All the prefectures have been plundered by the Khitans. I originally thought that now that the Khitans have been defeated, we could live in peace. Who knew? Who knew that the princes of the imperial court are even more ruthless than the Khitans? Most of the Khitans seize wealth. At least they don't want people's lives. But this Wu Yizong—" At this point, the middle-aged merchant slammed the table heavily, his face full of resentment. The northern aristocrats looked at each other in dismay and were all speechless. Yang Fan, who was listening at the side, couldn't help but secretly clench his fists. The rebels had been eliminated, but the one who had done the most evil was actually the one who pacified the rebels, the prince of the Wuzhou dynasty. Because Wu Yizong was far away from the battlefield, he arrived in Yuzhou too late. By the time he arrived, only a small portion of the Khitan rebel army had fled back to Yingzhou or into the mountains and forests. The majority had either defected to the Turks or surrendered to the imperial court. Wu Yizong hadn't caught many bandits, so he could only target the commoners who were celebrating their escape from the bandits. He even killed children of 3 or 5 years old, using their heads as compensation. Wu Yizong's actions against the commoners immediately shocked all the prefectures. The commoners fled upon hearing the news. Li Duozhua, Lu Shirda, Sha Zhongyi, and the other generals were shocked and personally went to Yuzhou to dissuade him. Even Wu Yui, who had been holed up in Danzhou and refused to go to battle, couldn't bear to watch any longer. It was true that he was afraid of battle, but he wasn't as brainless as Wu Yizong. The Wu family's performance on the Hebei battlefield had already become the laughingstock of the world. Were they afraid of being condemned by the masses if they did something so perverse? Moreover, the people of the north were tough and fierce. If they were provoked, it would be another disaster. Thus, Wu Yui immediately went to see Wu Yizong and sternly reprimanded him as his cousin. All the generals objected, and even his cousin flew into a rage. Wu Yizong also felt that his actions had offended the masses and didn't dare to kill the innocent. However, the heads he counted were far from enough to show off his military achievements. Thus, after Wu Yizong wrote a memorial recommending the imperial court to execute the entire clan of the commoners of Hebei who had joined the bandits and quickly sent it to the capital, he did another stupid thing. He set his sights on the Shi clan. Although the Shi clan had stabbed the Khitans in the back at the critical moment and expressed its position to the Great Zhou, it had still once cooperated with the Khitans. Wu Yizong led the army north and approached the Shi clan's territory, putting on an aggressive posture. He wanted to pacify Hebei and quell the Shi clan's rebellion to achieve an unparalleled merit. Chapter 762. When Wu Yizong's army arrived, King Shi was shocked and uneasy. After ambushing Sun Wanrong, he immediately wrote a letter of credence and sent someone to the Zhou emperor, stating his mistakes. He said that because his territory was close to the Khitans, he had no choice but to go against his will and compromise with Sun Wanrong in order to avoid being attacked by the Khitans, pretending to be an alliance. Now he was sending troops to help the court quell the rebellion, to show his sincerity and ask for forgiveness from the Celestial Emperor. However, there was still no news after the letter was sent. In the end, Wu Yizong, the Zhou Emperor's nephew and the northern marshal of the Fourth Route, personally led troops to the border of the Shi kingdom. When King Shi learned of this, he naturally thought that the Zhou Empress was not willing to pardon him. In a moment of desperation, he could only ask for protection from the Turks. After the Turks plundered the Eagle's Mouth, they escorted the Khitans and countless supplies back to the Turks. Because of the burden of the prisoners and supplies, their speed was not fast. Thus, Mu'en escorted the prisoners and supplies back to the west, while Tskbili and Seljuk led the light cavalry to bring up the rear. This way, they moved very slowly, and King Shi's messenger quickly caught up to them. When Tskbili and Seljuk heard that King Shi was willing to submit to the Turks and abandon Wu Zhou to serve the Turks, they couldn't help but be overjoyed. This was the biggest harvest of this expedition to the east. They immediately agreed and sent people to escort King Shi's envoy to see Moshe. When Tskbili heard that the Zhou army was pressing on the border and intended to invade the Shi tribe, he personally led 20,000 elite cavalry back into the Shi tribe's territory to confront Wu Yizong. Wu Yizong was arrogant at first, but when he found out that the troops were not the Shi tribe but the Turks, he was scared out of his wits and immediately withdrew his troops back to Yuzhou. When he fled back to Yuzhou, the generals and Wu Yi heard that he had attacked the Shi tribe without permission. By now, it was too late to stop him. The Shi tribe had already submitted to the Turks, and the entire Raoulu commandery had become Turk territory. The people of the Shi tribe's 10 provinces had all become Turk vassals. Even worse was that the Songma governor's office was further north of the Raoulu governor's office. Because the Raoulu governor's office had submitted to the Turks, the Wuzhou imperial court had no way of flying over Turkic territory to enforce its rule over the Songma governor's office. Thus, the 6 Khitan tribes had essentially separated themselves from the imperial court and could only submit to the Turks in the future. What was even more unexpected was that after the series of changes, the Bayan tribe, which was located in the eastern corner and separated from Goryeo by a river, had also undergone earth-shaking changes. The leader of the Tawu tribe, Dezworong, was brave, skillful, and resourceful. He had long unified the Tawu tribe. He had always wanted to establish a kingdom, but due to the power of Khitan, he had to rely on Khitan and didn't dare to proclaim himself king. The Khitan submitted to Wuzhou. They submitted to the Khitans, which was equivalent to Wuzhou's vassals. At present, the 6 Khitan tribes were like scattered sand and had no time to care about them. The Shi tribe had all submitted to the Turks, and the Central Plains Empire was blocked by the Shi tribe that had submitted to the Turks and couldn't threaten them. Dezworong was overjoyed and immediately took advantage of the situation to establish a state. He proclaimed himself king and established the state of Zhan Bohai. Because of Wu Yizong's foolish action, the Wuzhou imperial court lost a large area of territory and its people in the southern part of the Hebei province, and even gave birth to the state of Bohai. This was completely unexpected. Wu Yizong finally realized that he had caused a great disaster. He personally went to Wu Yi's tent and begged for forgiveness, kneeling on the ground and wailing. Although Wu Yi had been so infuriated by him that 1 Buddha was born and 2 Buddhas ascended to the heavens, the matter had already happened and could not be undone. If this matter were to spread, the entire Wu clan would be attacked. Helpless, Wu Yi could only invite Lu Shurda, Li Duozhua, Sha Zhongyi, and all the other generals to seal their mouths. Although this matter could not be completely concealed, as long as there was no official confirmation. Even if there was some discussion among the people, how long could it last? Lu Shurda and the others had been guarding the border all year round and fought with the enemy for every inch of land. For the sake of territory and population, they had fought with the Tubo and Turkic Khaganate for their entire lives and shed blood for their entire lives. Seeing how scoundrel Wu Yizong was, they really wanted to hack this scoundrel into 1,000 pieces to appease the hatred in their hearts. However, this world belonged to the Wu clan, and everyone knew that the empress was biased towards the Wu clan. Even if this matter was reported to the imperial court, Wu Yizong would not be executed. In order to give an explanation to the people of the world, the biggest possibility was that he would be banished to a place to be a provincial governor. He would be a scourge to the people for a few years and return to the capital after everything had calmed down. But what about them? From then on, they would become a thorn in the Wu clan side, and they would never have peace again. Helpless, the old generals maintained their silence at the same time. Wu Yi pacified the few generals and tried to conceal the cause of this series of events as much as possible. However, he did not dare to deceive Wu Zetian. He had always maintained a neutral position between Wu Sanxi and Wu Qingxi and had directly attached himself to the current emperor. So how could he dare to conceal anything? Therefore, after the matter was settled, he wrote a secret memorial and had it sent to the capital on horseback. Yang Fan was heading south at this moment and was completely unaware of the upheaval in the north. Because of Wu Yizong's carelessness, a large portion of the country that his ancestors had fought for was lost. After rushing day and night, he finally returned when the spring breeze had just blown through Luoyang and the city was filled with poplar catkins. Yang Fan's carriage drove through Luoyang's northern cities, Anqi Gate, and passed through various lanes until it exited Yuji Lane and arrived at the Luoshui River. Only then did it turn west and rushed along the riverbank to the Tianjin Bridge. Along the way, there were more and more pedestrians in front of him. Later on, the road was jammed with people, and the carriage could not move forward at all. Although Luoyang was bustling, there were not so many people in the past. For some reason, it was still far from the Tianjin Bridge, but the road was already crowded with people, and it was difficult to move even an inch. Yang Fan was in a hurry to go home to see his beloved wife and son. Seeing the scene, he couldn't help poking his head out and seeing the crowd in the distance. He could only see that the entire street was jammed. He couldn't help asking in surprise, "What happened?" At this time, one of the Succession Hall imperial bodyguards who was secretly protecting Yang Fan had already gone forward to inquire. A moment later, he came back to report, Lang, the emperor has issued an edict to execute the criminals at the Tianjin Bridge. The common people have all come to watch, so it's extremely crowded. Yang Fan's heart thumped. On the day that Lai Junqin and Li Zhaoda were executed, the street was not as crowded as this. Who was it that the emperor wanted to kill today that there would be such a large crowd? Yang Fan hurriedly asked. Who is the emperor going to execute? The imperial bodyguard replied. The one to be executed is the great general of the Baotao Guards, Yan Jiwei. This surname was rare, but Yang Fan found it somewhat familiar. After thinking carefully, he asked in surprise, Is it Yan Li's grandson? The imperial bodyguard replied, Yes. This Yan Li was a great craftsman in the early Tang dynasty. He was an expert in architecture and painting. Emperor Taizong's Zhao Mausoleum was designed and supervised by him. The pavilion of Lingyan was also built by him. Moreover, the pavilion of Lingyan's 24 meritorious officials and the Qin residence's 18 scholars painting were both created by him. Therefore, although he didn't know much about his grandson, Yang Fan, he knew a lot about this famous craftsman who had passed away a long time ago. Yang Fan asked in surprise, What crime did this General Yan commit? The imperial bodyguard replied, Yan Jiwei committed the crime of colluding with the enemy. The emperor has issued an edict, ordering all the officials to shoot him. Because of this rare scene, the common people are scrambling to watch. Upon hearing this, Yang Fan frowned. He didn't know what kind of enemy this person had conspired to provoke the emperor into such a thunderous rage that he came up with such a method to vent his anger. The imperial bodyguards under him also knew that their sovereign was anxious to return home. Seeing that the road ahead was blocked, someone had already gone to the embankment to call for a boat. After promising a generous reward, The boat anchored there and returned to Yang Fan's side, saying, "Ah Lang, I heard that the imperial court wants to execute his entire family. The execution won't be over for a while. Ah Lang, please board the boat and cross the river so that we can return to the residence." Yang Fan nodded and alighted from the carriage with An Nu and Gu Zhuting. They walked along the embankment and boarded the small boat. From afar, they could see a sea of people on both sides of the Tianjin Bridge. On the lonely bridge, there was only one person tied up. His heart was moved, and he ordered, "Sail the boat over, I want to see." The boatman, who had received a generous reward, had no reason to refuse. He hurriedly and attentively rowed the small boat over slowly. On the Tianjin Bridge, a person was standing upright in the middle of the bridge. One end of a long rope mixed with metal wire was tightly tied to his body, and the other end was firmly fixed to the stone pillars on both sides of the bridge railings to prevent him from falling. At this moment, the person's body was already covered with arrows. He looked like a human-shaped hedgehog, looking very frightening. A court official slowly walked to one side of the bridge. A military general handed him a bow and arrows. The person pulled the bowstring and looked at the bloody human-shaped hedgehog on the bridge. Even the facial features were difficult to recognize. The person's arms couldn't help but tremble. He shot an arrow, but it unexpectedly went askew, and the arrow lightly fell into the river. The military official next to him very patiently handed him another arrow, but this time the civil official shot the arrow askew again. After shooting 5 arrows in a row, he finally hit the bloody man's body. This civil official was already sweating profusely. Seeing that he had hit the target, he immediately felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders. He retreated with the help of someone else, as if he had collapsed. Another official walked up while trembling with fear and trepidation. He took the bow and arrow from the general's hands. This Yan Jiwei was originally the great general of the Baotao Guards. Because Wu Zetian had agreed to make peace with the Turks through marriage, she sent Wu Yanxiu to the Turks to escort the bride. Yan Jiwei was appointed as the envoy and was even given the title of Minister of Rights. As a result, as soon as Wu Yanxiu arrived at the Turks, Moshe used the excuse that Wu Yanxiu was not the son of the emperor and that his daughter was going to marry Prince Li Tang to put him under house arrest. Even now, he has not been released. Soon after, Moshe sent his troops to Hebei and pillaged the provinces. When his troops invaded Hebei, he also brought this unlucky ambassador to escort the bride with him. During the attack on Zhaozhou, in order to lower the morale of the defending troops, Moshe ordered Yan Jiwei and the Khitan soldiers to sing and dance at the foot of Zhaozhou's walls, singing "Long Live the Emperor." Zhaozhou's garrison, General Qinlingying, was furious and questioned him from the top of the city wall. "The Minister of Rights is an important position, yet you are forcing people to sing for you. Don't you feel ashamed?" Yan Jiwei could only reply with a bitter smile, "I was forced by others. I really had no choice." When Lu Shurda and Shatsa led their loyal troops into Hebei, the Turks retreated and killed tens of thousands of Zhaozhou people. Because Yan Jiwei had been obedient, they released him. In the end, when Yan Jiwei returned to the court, Wu Zetian heard about his shameful behavior at the foot of Zhaozhou and felt that it was a disgrace to the country. Especially when she had agreed to the marriage, the Turks went back on their word and detained Wu Yanxiu. It was like a fierce slap to her face. In her anger and humiliation, Wu Zetian vented all her anger on this cowardly man, resulting in this unprecedented execution. By the time the last official finished shooting, Yan Jiwei had become a hedgehog stained with blood. Because some of the officials were not good at archery, and their aim was poor, the arrows were all over his body. It was only because he was tied to a rope that he did not fall. At this time, an executioner dressed in red suddenly strode forward, followed by his disciple, who was holding a lacquer tray with red damask in his hand. The people at the bridgehead who had just started a commotion suddenly quieted down again. Chapter 763. Even though Yan Jiwei deserved to die, such a tragic way of death was enough to frighten the people who hated him to the core. leaving only fear in their hearts and not excitement to vent their anger. Now that the executioner came forward, the people gathered on both sides of the Tianjin Bridge did not know what other methods of execution would be used on a corpse. They all held their breath and watched. Yan Jiwei's death was extremely tragic, but the executioner had killed countless people in his life and was the #1 executioner in the Ministry of Justice. The executioners in the Ministry of Justice were all his disciples and granddisciples. In his lifetime, he had killed countless nobles and generals, so he naturally did not care about this scene. The executioner walked to the front of Yan Jiwei's upright corpse and reached out to pull out the arrows in his chest. One by one, the sharp arrows were pulled out from the corpse's flesh, and he threw them on the ground. Then he took out a sharp knife from the plate, and as the onlookers cried out in alarm, his wrist lowered, and the knife had already cut open Yan Jiwei's chest. Under the dumbfounded eyes of the crowd, the executioner cut open Yan Jiwei's chest and put his hand in to feel his heart. He swiftly cut it out with the knife and ruthlessly threw it on the ground. The scene of thousands of arrows piercing the heart and then cutting open the abdomen shocked the people who were watching the execution. Even though there were a few ruffians in the crowd who were still cheering, most people could not bear to watch anymore. At this moment, a row of prison carriages came from the direction of the Ministry of Justice. Luoyang Commandant Tang Zong led dozens of bailiffs to clear the way and forcefully split the crowd to ensure that the prison carriages could pass. There were men and women, old and young, in the prison carriages. They were all Yan Jiwei's family and relatives. Among them, the most conspicuous were a few children. They were imprisoned alone in a prison carriage. The older ones were 5 or 6 years old, and the younger ones were only 2 or 3 years old. Different from the lifeless expressions of the other adults in the prison carriages, the children did not seem to know what had happened. A few children grabbed onto the bars of the prison carriages and looked curiously at the crowded crowd by the roadside. They even had innocent smiles on their faces. An old woman looked at them, and tears suddenly welled up in her muddy old eyes. She turned around and forcefully squeezed out, murmuring, "Sin? What a sin! I can't watch it anymore." Her son was originally reluctant to leave, but seeing that his mother was about to leave, he could only chase after her. He protected his mother with one hand and separated the crowd with the other. The crowd was strangely silent. The mother and son easily pushed open a path and walked out. A peddler selling biscuits with a basket looked at the ignorant children and could not help but sigh sadly. Even if it was a great crime, there was no reason to implicate such young children. Why did such young children have to bear such a heavy punishment for their fathers? However, this was the decree of the Empress. Who dared to defy it? A child on the prisoner carriage saw the basket in his hands and looked eagerly. He even put a finger in his mouth and swallowed. The pancake peddler had an impulse. He went forward and grabbed a few pancakes from the basket and placed them in the cart. He said in a choked voice, "Children, eat them. Uncle gave them to you." It seemed that the children were really hungry. They all grabbed the biscuits and ate with relish. After the peddler finished handing over the biscuits, he looked with some fear at the bailiffs next to the prison carriages. The bailiffs had solemn expressions, but did not seem to see him. When they walked to his side, they only waved their hands for him to leave. Seeing the scene, more people were encouraged. Some people brought food with them. When the prison wagon carrying the children passed in front of them, they handed the food, candies, dried fruits, and pastries into the prison wagon. The children on the prison carriages were beaming with joy. 2 children were fighting over a few large dates and laughing as they pushed each other. They had no idea that their young lives were about to come to an end. Some of the soft-hearted commoners could not help but shed tears. On the execution platform on the north side of the Tianjin Bridge, the imperial censor saw this scene and his lips twitched. He also revealed an expression of pity. He reached out with a trembling hand and grabbed the punishment stick. He suddenly turned around and threw the punishment stick behind him. In a deep voice, he said, "By imperial decree, the young and old of the Yen family are all to be hanged to death. Immediately execute." Clang! The punishment stick fell to the ground. The sound was clear, but it was like a heavy drum beating on people's hearts. There were no cries of onlookers at the scene. Everyone was silent. The happy laughter of the ignorant children on the prison carriages was abnormally ear-piercing at this moment on the side door. Wu Zetian looked at the Tianjin Bridge in the distance. She fiercely slammed her walking stick on the ground and said, "Humph! Her daughter Yanxiu is not allowed to return to the court. She is happily singing and dancing outside the walls of Zhaozhou, causing my court to lose all dignity. Such a traitor has lost his teacher and humiliated the country. Even if I cut his flesh, break his bones, break his limbs, and execute his entire family, it will not appease the anger in my heart." Shang Guanwan quietly stood behind her. Her eyes were slightly lowered as she looked at the ground. She could not bear to raise her eyes to look. Zhang Yizhi and Zhang Changzong, who were supporting Wu Zetian, said, "Yan Jiwei deserves to die. The Yen family deserves to die. Your Majesty, please do not be angry, lest you injure your dragon body." It was at this moment that 2 Imperial Army officers supported a travel-worn and fatigued border army officer to the top of the city walls. The triangular red flag on the officer's shoulder had turned a dark red because it had been covered in too much dust. When Wu Zetian saw the situation, she thought that something big had happened at the border again. Her expression tightened. The officer had been running at full speed the whole way. His legs were still a bit numb, and he could only be supported by others. When he saw the Empress, the officer panted and knelt down to pay his respects. He took down the yellow silk package from his shoulder and held it up with both hands, saying, "Great General Wu Yui's secret memorial." Zhang Changzong hurriedly let go of Wu Zetian and went forward to take down the package. He opened it on the side and took out the sealed box. He opened the lacquered seal and took out a secret letter from within. He handed it over with both hands to Wu Zetian. Wu Zetian narrowed her presbyopic eyes and carefully read for a moment. Her face suddenly became ashen, and her hands couldn't help but start to tremble. Zhang Yizhi stood to the side and stole a glance. He could only faintly make out a few lines. It seemed that Wu Yui's secret memorial to Wu Yizong was about something. He could also faintly make out some words that seemed to mention the Shi tribe, the Turks, and the Bayan people establishing a country. He deserves to die. He really deserves to die. Losing power and humiliating the country, we are united here. Wan and Zhang Changzong were both a bit surprised. They didn't know what had happened. Wu Zetian tightly gripped Wu Yui's secret memorial and panted heavily. She suddenly felt a bit dispirited. After a moment of silence, she said in a calm voice, "Wan pass on the edict. The battle in Hebei has ended. Chief Commander Wu Yizong is to immediately resign from his post to Wu Yui and return to Luoyang. Based on his military achievements, he will be appointed Great General of the Left and lead the troops stationed in Jingdou." Shang Guanwan hurriedly bowed in acknowledgement. Wu Zetian gripped the secret letter in her hand and shakily turned around. Yan Jiwei was greedy for life and afraid of death. But it was only because she was forced by the butcher's knife that she danced and danced to lower the morale of the Zhaozhou garrison. Wu Yizong lost his land and lost his people. The losses he caused to the court were like heaven and earth compared to Yan Jiwei. If Wu Yizong's surname wasn't Wu, if he wasn't connected to Wu Zetian in both glory and loss, then even if he died 10,000 times, it wouldn't be regretful. In the letter, Wu Yui listed all the stupid things Wu Yizong had done in Hebei and repeatedly begged the Empress to transfer him away. Otherwise, who knew what other unimaginably stupid things he would do? Wu Zetian really hated this little beast now, but what could she do? She could only hide this matter as much as possible and pretend that nothing had happened. Because of Wu Yizong's stupidity, Wu Zetian was even more disappointed in the Wu family. She angrily looked at the Tianjin Bridge and saw that the crowd was dispersing. It looked like the execution had finished. But then Wu Zetian discovered that someone was collecting the bodies of Yan Jiwei's family. Wu Zetian's anger, caused by Wu Yizong's stupidity, suddenly had a target to vent. She pointed at the Tianjin Bridge and shouted in a deep voice, "Didn't the old and young of the Yan family all die? Who was the one who collected his corpse? Is there someone who sympathizes with the traitor? Or is there still evil left in the Yan family?" Zhang Yiji hurriedly summoned an imperial guard general and ordered him to go investigate. He then smiled apologetically at Wu Zetian and said, "Your Majesty, please don't be angry. Please don't be angry and harm the dragon body. Yiji has already sent someone to take a look. We will know the details in a moment." Yang Fan rowed the small boat upstream, and by the time he reached the Tianjin Bridge, the execution was already over. The bodies of the Yan family were thrown to the side of the bridge, waiting for Basho to bring people to deal with them. The executioner had already left with his subordinates, and the crowd was also gradually leaving. Yang Fan abandoned the boat and went ashore. He saw the bodies of the Yan family members, men and women, old and young. He stood there and didn't say a word. He didn't know if it was because he was used to seeing death on the battlefield or because he had seen many families slaughtered by the Empress. But strangely, Yang Fan didn't feel any sorrow or anger. Perhaps Yan Jiwei deserved to die, even if the punishment was a bit harsh. But even if he didn't deserve to die, Yang Fan didn't feel angry. There were many families that were more innocent than the Yan family that had their entire families killed. It could be because of political strife or war. Such things were unavoidable in any dynasty and at any time. But the frequency of such tragedies could be controlled. In Yang Fan's heart, the desire to overthrow the Wu family's rule grew stronger and stronger. He now somewhat understood why Xue Huai wanted to burn down heaven. It was because he also wanted to burn down Wu Zetian's throne. Yang Fan stood silently for a long time before ordering people to buy some coffins from a coffin shop. He had them put away the bodies of the Yan family members and sent them to the monastery to be buried. If these bodies were handed over to Basho to deal with, they could only be wrapped in straw mats and buried in a random barren mountain or thrown into a monastery to be cremated. Perhaps Yan Jiwei wasn't worthy of sympathy, but he couldn't hide his compassion when faced with those young corpses. The people who went to buy the coffins hadn't returned yet when an imperial guard quickly rushed over. A squad leader sternly shouted, "Who is the one collecting the corpses of the traitors?" Yang Fan turned his head and indifferently glanced at him. The squad leader was startled and said in shock, "Yang, Lang Jiang, Lang Zhong. Oh no, Colonel Yang." This captain was a member of the 100 Cavalry, and his name was Zhang Shidong. In the past, he had gone to the western region with Yang Fan to spy on intelligence, and it was thanks to Yang Fan that he was promoted. Now that he suddenly saw his old superior in front of him, he felt a little embarrassed. Zhang Shitong hesitated for a moment before quickly walking forward and whispering, "Colonel, His Majesty saw someone collecting the corpses of the Yan family and was rather angry. He ordered this lowly one to bring someone back to question him. Colonel, you must be careful." Yang Fan nodded and said, "I'll go with you." Having said that, he dusted off his clothes and walked towards the palace. Zhang Shidong was startled and quickly followed behind. A squad of imperial guards wielding halberds and swords seemed to have become his followers. Chapter 764. Yang Fan. Wu Zetian saw Yang Fan and revealed a slightly surprised expression. Yang Fan bowed and said, "Yes, it is me. I was slightly injured in Hebei and could not follow General Li Duozhua into battle due to the inconvenience of riding a warhorse. I am indebted to General for your consideration in allowing me to return to the capital first." As Yang Fan said this, he quickly glanced at Shanghai Wanner. Wanner's eyes were already brimming with tears of joy. She hurriedly lowered her head and pretended to smooth her sleeves to hide her uncontrollable joy. Wu Zetian's face darkened and she coldly stared at him. She slowly said, "Do you know who I executed at the Tianjin Bridge?" Yang Fan said, I have already heard. I believe that Yan Jiwei should be executed. Your Majesty executed her entire family to serve as a warning to others. However, the entire Yan family has already been executed. It is not appropriate to leave their corpses exposed on the streets. I did not know Yan Jiwei and did not have any personal feelings for him. It was purely to protect your Majesty's benevolence. Wu Zetian coldly glanced at him again and quietly thought for a moment. She did not mention this matter and changed the topic. She asked, Yang Xian captured the Khitan general He Shao at the front lines. Later, the Khitan generals Luo Wuzhen and Li Zhanggu surrendered with their troops. Then, Fei Mo killed Sun Wanrong and surrendered with his head. Before this, the court suffered heavy casualties at the east and west gorges of the Hebei province. These Khitan generals killed the most of our soldiers that day. Most of the civil and military officials in the court believe that they are unforgivable and should be executed to wipe away their previous shame. You came from the Hebei province and know them well. What do you think I should do? Yang Fan did not dare to be perfunctory about this matter. He thought for a moment and answered seriously, In the battlefield, everyone serves their own masters. I do not think it is appropriate to use this as a reason to kill captives and surrender. However, Hia Shao is a cruel person. Among the Khitan generals, he killed the most and often enjoyed torturing and killing the common people. He is guilty of the most heinous crimes and should not be pardoned. This official thinks that he should be punished in the open to deter thieves and thieves. Wu Zetian nodded slightly and asked, What about the other generals? Yang Fan said, Since Fei Mo killed his leader and led his people to surrender to the court, I believe that the court should accept it. Otherwise, if there is another threat on the border, the Idi would rather die in battle than surrender. Moreover, the 6 Khitan tribes that are still residing in the Yingzhou region will also feel sympathy for the loss of their own kind and will have different opinions about the imperial court. Wu Zetian smiled bitterly, hearing Yang Fan say this. She knew that he still did not know that the Shi tribe had already submitted to the Turks. The 6 Khitan tribes were now essentially independent. De Zhuorong had also taken the opportunity to establish his own state. The great Zhou dynasty had now lost the entire northeast. Moreover, she had heard that Fei Mo had integrated the remaining forces of Sun Wanrong and Li Jinzhong's Daya clan. Nominally, the Daya clan was the leader of the Khitans, but in terms of strength, they no longer lived up to their name. In addition, she had heard that Fei Mo had integrated the remaining forces of Sun Wanrong and Li Jinzhong's Daya clan. In name, the Daya clan was the leader of the Khitans, but in terms of strength, they no longer lived up to their name. If they were allowed to return to Yingzhou, then the Khitan 6 tribes, whose strength had been preserved, and the Daya clan, who had nominal authority over the Khitans, would inevitably fight for power. It would be normal for this fight to last for 80 to 100 years, so their internal friction would be extremely beneficial to the Wuzhou dynasty. Thus, although Yang Fan's reasoning was not as good as hers, it still gained her approval. Yang Fan continued, As for Li Kaigu and Luo Wuzhen, they are brave and skilled in battle. They are indeed talented. Moreover, during the period when they were leading the troops, their discipline could be considered strict. Although they did plunder property, they rarely harmed the common people. Now that they have taken the initiative to surrender, your subject believes that the imperial court can take them in. Wu Zetian said, But most of the officials and generals in the imperial court think that they are Khitans and cannot be trusted. What do you think? Yang Fan said, In the Lingyan pavilion, Yu Qigong and Chu Tudong are not Han. Haitiai Changji, Li Duozhua, and Shatzazhongyi are also not Han. Yan Jiwei, who was just executed by His Majesty, is a Han. Your subject believes that loyalty and treachery, courage and cowardice have nothing to do with which clan they belong to. If His Majesty treats them with sincerity, how can they not die for His Majesty? Yang Fan was discussing the matter on its own merits. He felt that the Khitans should be treated differently. Luo Wujin and Li Kaigu were brave and skilled in battle. If they could be subdued, it would be beneficial to the country. However, he did not expect that his words today would protect Li Kaigu's life and future. Otherwise, the famous general of the Tang dynasty, Li Guangbi, would not have the opportunity to be born again. Listening to Yang Fan's words, Wu Zetian pondered for a moment. Her heart was filled with ambition again. She believed that, with her courage, she could definitely subdue these two surrendered generals. Therefore, she nodded and said, "When Elder Di wrote to the imperial court about the treatment of the surrendered generals, there are many similarities with what you have said. Master Di is experienced in scheming for the country. You are also familiar with these two Khitan generals. Zhen deeply agrees with your suggestion. Wu Zetian was most skilled in grasping people's minds and human nature. But perhaps she was too old, so old that she did not have the energy to see through other people's minds. When she once again used Di Renjie and entrusted him with heavy responsibility, she completely forgot the confession that Di Renjie wrote in anger when he was imprisoned. Great Zhou Revolution. All things are reformed. Tang's old ministers are willing to be slaughtered." In Di Renjie's heart, he had always regarded himself as an old minister of the Tang dynasty. At this moment, Wu Zetian did not notice the coldness hidden deep in Yang Fan's eyes. Wu Zetian's expression softened. Looking deeply at Yang Fan, she slowly said, "All right, Zhen knows what you did in Hebei. Zhen has always been fair in rewards and punishment. I will not forget your contributions. Since you are injured, go back to the residence and rest. When the matter in Hebei is over, Zhen will put you in an important position." Yang Fan bowed in agreement. When he hurried to leave, he looked at Shanghai Wanner in a daze. "Wanner, follow Zhen back to the palace. Wanner." Wu Zetian slowly turned around. After taking 2 steps, she suddenly noticed that Shanghai Wanner did not move. She could not help but look at her strangely. Ah, Wanner is thinking about the matter of the Turks. Since the Khitan generals can treat the Turks differently, can your Majesty also temporarily use the policy of restraining them? Wanner hurriedly chased after Wu Zetian and casually found an excuse. Wu Zetian slammed her walking stick on the ground and angrily said, "The Turks! The Turks! They put Yan Xiu under house arrest. The imperial court sent messengers to urge them, but they refused to let her go. The Shi tribe was originally a vassal of Zhou, but they dared to brazenly snatch it from Zhen's hands. Now they are asking for rewards for sending troops to help Zhen fight against the rebels. How preposterous!" Wanner softly advised, "Your Majesty, it is not the right time for our imperial court to start a war with the Turks. Your Majesty, please bear with it for now. Build up the strength of the country. Sooner or later, we will make them pay back with interest." Wu Zetian angrily walked a few steps. Finally, she dejectedly sighed and said, "Then, I will add Moshe as the great Chanyu of Jie, Di, Li Shi, and the Khan. As for the rewards, you decide." "Yes." Wanner bowed and agreed. She was thinking of finding a convenient opportunity to ask Wu Zetian for a few days off to visit relatives. That enemy, every time he went out, he was always worried. He didn't know how much she had to worry for him. Now that he saw her, he would definitely not be able to have peace. Officer, take care." Zhang Shitong respectfully sent Yang Fan to the palace gate and politely said a few words. Yang Fan smiled and said, "We are brothers, no need to be so polite." He patted Zhang Shitong's shoulder and warmly said, "We are good brothers who went to the western regions together. It has been a long time since we met. I have just returned, so it is not convenient for me to meet these 2 days. How about 5 days later? 5 days later, I will host a banquet at the 1,000 Gold Drunk and have a gathering with my old brothers. I will have to trouble you to inform our brothers." Zhang Shitong was overwhelmed by the favor. He hurriedly said, "Haha, officer, thank you for your generosity. Actually, all of our brothers are looking forward to meeting with you. However, because you have always been busy, we did not dare disturb you. Don't worry, Lieutenant. Leave this matter to me. Yang Fan nodded, turned around, and walked out of the side gate. In the past, he had only interacted with high-ranking officers, but now he felt the need to gather these comrades who had gone through thick and thin with him in the western regions. They were all part of the 100 Cavalry, and perhaps when the time came he would need them the most. Yang Fan walked out of the side gate. Not long after, a guard of honor approached him. Yang Fan didn't pay them any mind, and even deliberately moved to the side to avoid them. Unexpectedly, the guard stopped right in front of him, and a voice came from the carriage. Erlang. Yang Fan raised his head and saw that it was King Liang Wu Sansi sitting in the carriage. He hurriedly crossed his arms and bowed. Yang Fan greets your highness, King Liang. Wu Sansi smiled and solemnly said, Get in the carriage. Yes. Yang Fan replied and boarded the carriage. King Liang's carriage was quite spacious, and there were seats on both sides. Wu Sansi had him sit in the side seat. He looked him up and down, and then said with a smile, You did well in Hebei. This king is already aware of that. Yang Fan still had to feign civility with Wu Sansi, so he couldn't show any impatience. He bowed and said with a smile, The situation was urgent, and Great General Li Duozuo's subordinates were lacking in eloquence. I had no other choice, so I had no choice but to do what I could. Compared to the soldiers who fought on the front lines, what I did cannot be considered a great contribution. Wu Sansi waved his hand and said, There is no need to be humble when you deserve credit. Mencius once said, Those who use their minds govern others, and those who use their strength govern others. These words are not false. Even on the battlefield, those who are good at using schemes and strategies are still superior to those who are brave and valiant. He smiled and stroked his beard. He looked at Yang Fan and said, You have made a great contribution this time, and His Majesty will definitely reward you. You were delayed in your appointment at the Ministry of Personnel, but with this contribution, it won't be difficult for you to make a comeback. What are your plans? Perhaps this king can lend you a helping hand. Yang Fan's heart moved. After thinking for a while, he put on a wry smile and said, I am indebted to your highness' praise. In fact, this official's scheming can only be used in front of those illiterate generals. Compared to the minds of the officials in the court, this is far from enough. From the Ministry of Justice to the Ministry of Personnel, this subject has always been reckless and impetuous. It was only through my courage and your highness' care that I was able to continue my journey. Otherwise, I would have fallen a long time ago. This subject feels that the path of a civil official is not suitable for a martial artist like this subject. This subject wishes to return to the Imperial Army and the 100 Cavalry. What does your highness think? Chapter 765. Good. Wu Sansi was overjoyed. He heavily patted Yang Fan's shoulder and said excitedly, Erlang's thoughts coincide with mine. Haha, I also have the same thoughts. I was just worried that you were unwilling to give up your career as a civil official and return to the army. Now that Erlang has the same thoughts, I will ensure that you return to the 100 Cavalry. At this point, Wu Sansi suddenly stopped talking and looked around. He slightly leaned forward and said mysteriously, I'm afraid there will be changes in the court. Erlang can return to the army and display his skills. Yang Fan was slightly surprised and asked, What do you mean? Wu Sansi's expression darkened. He gritted his teeth and said, The Khitans rebelled and shouted the slogan, Return Luling and Prince Yang. The Turks invaded and shouted the slogan, Replace Li Li to defeat Zhou. Even that old thief Di Renjia took the opportunity to use the title of Crown Prince to confuse people. According to the information I received, His Majesty was silent for a few days after hearing these news. Not long after, His Majesty asked about the food in the East Palace and allowed the crown heirs to go out of the city to ride horses. He also started to pay attention to the news from Fangzhou. This is unprecedented. Yang Fan's expression turned serious and said, "His Majesty has decided on an heir." Wu Sanxi shook his head and said, "From the information I received, it seems that he has not decided. However, His Majesty's thoughts are like the sea and are the most difficult to guess. We must be on guard. When you return to the army, you must quickly grab a group of people loyal to you. After His Majesty's 100 years, if there are any changes, we can also—" Wu Sanxi stretched out a tightly clenched fist and slowly opened it with his palm facing up. He then slowly flipped it over and pressed it heavily on his knee. Yang Fan quickly acted like he understood and said, "This official understands." Wu Sanxi raised his hand and pressed it on his shoulder. He said in a deep voice, "If I can rule the world, I will not mistreat you." Yang Fan said sternly, "I will naturally serve your highness." Wu Sanxi nodded with satisfaction and said, "Good. Go home and rest. Leave the matter of returning to the 100 cavalry to me." Yang Fan said yes. "Are you in such a hurry to enter the palace?" Wu Sanxi revealed a complacent look and said, "That's right. His Majesty has entrusted me with the task of rebuilding Ming Hall, Heaven, and casting the 9 cauldrons. Now, Ming Hall and Heaven have not been completed in time, but the 9 cauldrons are almost complete." Wu Sanxi smiled and said, "The 9 cauldrons consume a total of 500 pounds of copper. The Yongchang cauldron is the head of the cauldron, which is 10 feet and 8 feet tall. The other 8 cauldrons are 10 feet and 4 feet tall. This prince is thinking that the 9 cauldrons must be completed before the award ceremony for the great victory in Hebei. This way, Your Majesty will be able to suppress the 9 prefectures and reign supreme in the universe." Yang Fan sighed and lightly said, "Prince is filial to His Majesty. His Majesty should really choose Prince as the crown prince." Wu Sanxi laughed heartily, but before he could finish his laughter, his face darkened. "It's a pity that Dan and Xian didn't die. Otherwise, the crown prince wouldn't be so difficult to decide." South of Luoyang, Jiaqing Lane, Ning Ku had lived here for a whole winter. In fact, she should have returned to Chang, and before winter came, but her condition suddenly worsened. The boat lady didn't dare to let her travel long distances, so she continued to stay here and invited a famous doctor in Luoyang to treat her. But Ning Ku's condition didn't improve. When Duguyu heard the news, he was worried about his sister's condition and also rushed over from Chang. The famous doctor in Luoyang, Jiang Shichen, was hired by the Dugu family with a large sum of money. Now he lived in the Dugu family's mansion and specially made prescriptions for Ning Ku. It was quiet in the courtyard. A few birds on the tree chirped a few times, but they were blown away by the maid with a long pole. On the bed, Ning Ku woke up with a start. The room was dark, and it seemed to be dusk. When she fainted because of the pain, it seemed to be in the morning. Ning Ku touched her body weakly. When she couldn't bear the pain in her head, she sweated profusely. But now she didn't feel sticky, and her clothes had been changed. The boat lady knew that she was clean, so she must have wiped her body and changed her clothes. Ning Ku softly moaned and raised her hand to gently touch her forehead. The emerald green bracelet on her thin wrist was still empty. She had suffered a lot this winter. Her body became thinner, her chin was sharp, and her face was haggard. Only her eyes were still big. Hearing the faint moan, the boat lady hurried to the bed and called softly, "Miss!" Ning Ku said in a low voice, "Is it dark?" The boat lady hurriedly shook her head. "No, I don't want to disturb you, so I closed the window." As she said this, she hurried to the window, pulled open the thick velvet curtains, and gently opened the window. Sunshine came in, and the fresh spring breeze blew in. Ning Ku slightly narrowed his eyes and gently took a breath of the fresh air with the smell of spring. The boat lady returned to the bed and sat down. She gently held Ning Ku's skinny little hand and whispered, "Miss, Yang Fan has returned to the capital." "Oh, Ning's eyes suddenly lit up. The boat lady said, "Do you want to see him? Maybe you want to chat with him." Ning's eyes dimmed again. She gently stroked her thin cheeks and said, "Quietly, he's gone. Why should I see him? This time, I can finally go out of the house. I can travel so far and see so many mountains and rivers. I'm very happy." The boat lady said, "Miss." Ning gently pursed her lips and firmly shook her head. After a long silence, she faintly said, "I am a useless person. I'm a burden to my elder brother. He left his family business to stay with me and worry about me every day. I'm a burden to everyone." The boatwoman panicked. She placed her hand over her heart and said, "How can Miss say that? In this world, I have never seen a girl more intelligent and quick-witted than Mississippi Miss is the best girl in the world." Ning foolishly looked at the curtain, slightly swayed by the spring breeze, and softly said, "But that's not what I want. I just hope that I won't have to live so hard in my next life." With a soft sigh, Ning tiredly closed her eyes again. The boat lady gently held her skinny little hand. Unknowingly, tears had crept up her cheeks. The flower hall of the Yang family was more than twice the size of the one Yang fan had in the capital. The floor was covered with a soft carpet. Two little guys wobbled, one in front and the other in the back. The child in front looked a little shorter. He had a cute hairstyle like a teapot lid and wore open crotch pants. He walked to the antique shelf like a little penguin and tiptoed to reach a set of Han Dynasty pottery wall pots with two birds and monsters on them. "Oh, my little ancestor, you can't touch this thing. It's your father's decoration." Xiaoman, who was sitting on the table and wiping Yang Fan's scabbard, turned her head and saw him. She hurriedly ran over, slapped his little butt, and grabbed his little hand. Yang Nianzu unhappily shouted a few times. Seeing that his mother didn't allow him to touch it, he finally gave up. He struggled out of his mother's arms and wobbled forward again. Xiaoman let out a sigh of relief, but as soon as she turned around, she saw her precious daughter squatting in front of the 12 painted screens, reaching her little hand into the gaps of the painted screens to feel. Xiaoman quickly ran over and scolded, "My daughter, you're not delicate at all. You haven't even wiped here yet, and your hands are covered in dust. Tao Mei, get a rag and get a basin of water." "Pa." There was a loud noise behind her. Xiaoman turned her head and saw that young Master Yang had suddenly run to the door and pushed down the flower stand. The flower pot on the flower stand fell to the ground and broke into a few petals. Yang Nianzu turned pale with fright. He was stunned for a moment. Then he immediately ran and rushed into his mother's arms with his two short legs. "You little bastard, how many flower pots have you broken?" Xiaoman slapped the arhut bed with hatred. Seeing this, Yang Nianzu hurriedly stood on his tiptoes, raised his little hand, and slapped the bed hard. He glared at his mother and cried out, imitating Xiaoman's expression, actions, and even tone to perfection. "Oh, you're rebelling, are you learning from me?" Xiaoman fiercely slapped the arhut bed 3 times. Yang Nianzu's desire to learn was abnormally strong. He immediately did it 3 times without skipping a beat. Xiaoman angrily sat on the bed and said, "Fine, do it. When your father comes back, let's see how he'll deal with you." In the blink of an eye, Yang Nianrong, who had been ignored by her, ran to the table again and reached out her little hand to grab the scabbard on the table. "You can't touch it. You can't touch it." Xiaoman couldn't care less about pretending to be angry. She hurriedly ran over and reached out to touch the scabbard, then quickly retracted her hand. She frowned and pretended to be in pain, saying, "Ah, it hurts." Seeing this, Yang Nianrong also reached out her hand. She couldn't reach the scabbard on the table, so she reached out her little hand to touch the table leg. Then she quickly retracted her hand and also frowned, saying in a childish voice, "Ah, it hurts." Xiaoman was so angry that she laughed. She poked her forehead and said angrily, You, and you, why did I give birth to a pair of naughty children like you? Just you wait, your father will be back soon. When he gets home, humph. Just because you guys are so naughty, it would be strange if he doesn't spank your butts 8 pieces. Yang Yenrong was startled and said, Daddy, butts 8 pieces. Yang Yinzu was a boy, so he learned slower than his sister. He followed up with a lisp, stacked butts 80,000. Xiaoman glared with her almond-shaped eyes and said, Yes, 80,000. I'll spank your little butts into 80,000. I can't bear to. You're just a kid. Be more naughty, and you'll have a bright future when you grow up. Suddenly, a laughing voice came from the side. Xiaoman suddenly turned her head and saw the man standing at the door with a smile. Her tears suddenly fell uncontrollably. From the uncertainty of Yang Fan's life and death to the news of his survival at the military station, Xiaoman felt like she had fallen from heaven to hell, and from hell to heaven. Her heart was really tortured. She thought, she worried, she cried, she was happy in all kinds of feelings. Now that she finally saw him return safely, only salty tears rushed to her lips. Lang Jun. Xiaoman threw herself into his arms with tears streaming down her face. Yang Fan tightly hugged Xiaoman, who was crying out in pain in his arms, and gently patted her back. Nian Rong and Nian Zhu looked at their mother, who had lost her composure, and the man who was a little familiar and a little unfamiliar at the same time. Yang Fan raised his tearful eyes and suddenly saw the cute siblings. He couldn't help but smile kindly at them. Daddy is back! Nian Rong shouted, But's 8 pieces. After saying that, she turned around and ran. Nian Zhu followed closely behind, shouting, But's 80,000! But's 80,000! Ouch! Yang Yinzu fell to the carpet and quickly got up. He exclaimed, But's 80,000! And ran away. Chapter 766. What was a home? First of all, it should be a house. Whether it was big or small, gorgeous or simple, it should have walls to block the wind, a roof to block the rain, a bed to sleep in, and a stove to cook. Then there should be a door. When it was opened, it could integrate into the world as a member of the family. When the door was closed, it could be alone with the people closest to it in its own little world. Finally, in it, there should be men and women, and sooner or later, there must be old people and children, bonded by blood, affection, and love. Home was a place to confide in the moonlight, a place to support each other in the sunset, a place to bear a heavy burden, and also a responsibility. Home was a place that could really make you feel warm, free, and relaxed. It was always comfortable to return to one's own home. Although when Yang Fan was not there, this big family of dozens of people still lived, but there was always a little less vitality. On the surface, Yang Fan's return did not seem to make any changes to the family, but he was like a silent spring rain, quietly nourishing the family, making it full of vitality. The doorman, Mo Xuanfei, stood at the door and shouted loudly, driving away the old dog of the Li family next door, who peed on his own stone steps. His voice was full of energy and loud. Looking at his posture, even the big monk who preached at the gate of the White Horse Temple on Buddha's birthday could not compare to his voice. Tao Mei and Sanjiera were walking along the corridor. The spring breeze was caressing their faces. The spring grass was green, and the spring flowers were enchanting. Their footsteps were as light as 2 swallows flying across the water. Their wooden clogs tapped on the paulownia wood floor with a ding-ding sound. It was like a light and lively song. Their slender waists were swaying gracefully. Their breasts, which were growing taller by the day, were also raised high. The 2 inconspicuous little girls in the past had become more and more beautiful in the good wind and water of the Yang family. Xiaoman did not seem to have any special performance, except for the moment when she saw Yang Fan. A housewife must be calm, dignified, and expressionless. Just like those officials who had just been promoted 3 levels, the old woman on the bed had just been replaced by a beautiful new wife, and last night, someone gave him a huge sum of money that was enough to spend for at least half of his life. Only the maids and servants in the family would be in awe of her. Therefore, Xiao Man could only reluctantly raise her pretty face. Unfortunately, even those who had not seen her expression yesterday could not make a comparison, but they could still see how radiant she was at this moment. It was a kind of glory that radiated from the inside out. Men were the backbone of the family and the backbone of a woman. Maybe they did not show how important they were when they were at home every day, but when his family and his woman experienced the torment of losing and regaining, he just appeared here and the whole family would change for him. Yang Fan lay lazily on a leisure chair and did nothing. There were fragrant flowers all around, and a few diligent bees and beautiful butterflies were dancing in the flowers. Only when they flew to the top of the man's head and tried to explore his hair, would Yang Fan wave his hand lazily. When he was tired, he could rest anywhere. Some gorgeous and comfortable hotels took care of the guests 100 times more considerate than at home. But no matter how good the place was, it could not give people the feeling of being at home. Only here he could completely relax from body to heart. Xiao Man went to see Anu. She pulled her, and no one knew what they were whispering. Sometimes she smiled, sometimes she cried, sometimes it was Xiao Man holding Anu's soft hand, and sometimes it was Anu caressing Xiao Man's back. No one knew what the two women were playing. In fact, Xiao Man was reluctant to leave Yang Fan for a moment, but the man had returned home, and she was not afraid that he would run away again. Therefore, reason prevailed over emotion. She did not want to stick to the man now and neglect Anu, who had just returned home after accompanying her husband through life and death. Yang Fan was well aware of this. Wasn't the little thoughts of a woman to make the family more harmonious and happier? Xiao Man was so clever and so careful to protect the whole family, which made him feel warm from the bottom of his heart. It was his blessing to have a good wife in the family. Si Rong and Yen Zhu were by his side. In the whole Yang mansion, only these two little guys did not change because of Yang Fan's return. They were as naughty as ever, venting their excessive energy and endless curiosity about the world. The two little guys were no longer afraid of him. When Yang Fan was not at home, it was when the two children gradually understood the adult's words and began to contact the world. The twins were full of energy, and Xiao Man, who managed the whole family alone, was often exhausted by them, so she used their father's absence to frighten them over and over again. Over time, in the hearts of the two little fellows, the vague image of their father in their childhood had become the most terrifying and violent little monster in the world. He would blow his beard and glare at them. He would raise his palm-leaf-sized palm and slap their tender little buttocks into 80,000. He would coldly punish them, not allowing them to eat or sleep. He would throw them into the Luo River to feed the big fish. So, when they heard that the man who made their mother cry was the legendary monster, Daddy, the two little guys were scared and ran away. But soon, they found that this little monster was actually not scary at all. When he talked to them, he was very friendly with a smile, and he also brought a lot of delicious snacks for them to eat. Even if their mouths were full of food crumbs, he did not wipe their mouths with a handkerchief like their mother, which made their delicate lips hurt. Mother is lying. The image of a strict mother in the hearts of the little brother and sister further collapsed, and they developed in the direction of a loving mother. And the image of a strict father had not yet been erected. He was now just upgraded from a little monster to a little monster that was not scary. Sister, come. Yang Nianzu, who was wearing open-crotch pants, did not know what good thing he found, and ran to hold his sister's little hand. Boys and girls seemed to be born very different in character. Si Rong was also naughty, but she was interested in the butterflies among the flowers and plants. Therefore, Si Rong disdained the little brother's invitation, and glared at him with her beautiful big eyes, and imitated her mother's tone. Wipe your nose. If you don't wipe your butt, I'll spank you. There was a little snot under Yang Nianzu's nose. It was not sloppy, but in the eyes of a girl who liked cleanliness, this was enough for her to refuse to be a playmate. Yang Nianzu sniffed, and then continued to hold her hand. Mau Mau pet! Mau Mau pet! I don't want to catch a butterfly. Si Rong shook off her brother's hand and tiptoed to a butterfly. The good-tempered Yang, Nianzu sniffed, hobbled away, picked up a half-foot-long grass stick from the ground, walked in front of Yang Fan, and slowly bent down. Yang Fan had sat up straight and looked at him with a slight smile. There was a caterpillar on the ground, trying to wriggle into the flowers. Yang, Nianzu, stood far away from it, carefully stretched out a small grass stick, and gently poked it twice. The grass stick passed 2 fingers away from the insect. The little guy did not step forward, but bent his waist deeper, and 2 white and smooth little buttocks were exposed like perfume pears. He stretched out the grass stick and desperately tried to poke it. The insect was suddenly attacked, and urgently resisted twice, then curled up and pretended to be dead. Yan Nianzu exclaimed, threw away the grass stick, turned around and ran. He stumbled into the arms of Yang Fan, who had been waiting there for a long time. He tightly held his neck, turned his head, and pointed to the ground. It was not known whether he was happy or afraid, but he shouted, "Mao, Mao Pet! Mao, Mao Pet!" Yang Fan asked with a smile, "Are you afraid?" "Afraid. Mao, Mao Pet." Yang Nianzu frowned and made a nervous and frightened expression. His 2 little feet stepped on his father's knees, trying to climb higher. Yang Fan held his little buttocks and laughed. He leaned back, and the chair carrying the father and son began to squeak. The sky was high, the clouds were light, the birds were singing, the flowers were singing, the spring breeze was blowing, and the laughter was loud. Yang Fan loved this kind of life. When Yang Fan was enjoying the happiness of his family at home, Princess Taiping was holding a banquet in her mansion. She did not know that Yang Fan had returned to Luoyang, but she already knew that Yang Fan was fine. In the princess's mansion, everyone was sitting, all dressed in light robes, drinking and laughing. If someone saw these people gathered around Princess Taiping at this moment and knew that these people were all under Princess Taiping's tutelage, then he would definitely be secretly surprised. Princess Taiping had already gathered so many officials in the court unknowingly, and among them there was no lack of ministers with great power, thanks to the rebellion of Li Jinzhong and Sun Wanrong, the invasion of the Turkic Moki Khan, and the clumsy and stupid behavior of the Wu's nephews on the battlefield. Wu Zetian had completely lost hope of inheriting the throne. She had no doubt that if she really handed the throne to her nephews, she would definitely follow the footsteps of Emperor Qin and Emperor Wen of Sui. Although she had not publicly stated that she would make the descendants of the Lis the heir, she had made subtle adjustments in the policy. Many of Li Tang's old officials, including those who had always publicly expressed their loyalty to Li Tang, were reinstated. Princess Taiping also took advantage of this relaxed political environment to win over a large number of officials. Her disciples were full of talents, and now it was like a small court. Princess Taiping drank a few cups of wine, and her cheeks were already faintly blushing, making this Luoyang peony look even more beautiful, so that the disciples did not dare to look directly at her, lest they would be frightened by her beauty and show their ugly behavior, causing people to laugh at them. Princess Taiping put down her wine cup and said with a smile, "The current development of the court is greatly beneficial to us. However, the Mother Empress's thoughts have always been unpredictable and changeable. It is difficult to say whether the Mother Empress will change her mind again because the situation in Hebei has calmed down. I wonder if everyone has a good plan for this?" Chui Ti lightly stroked his beard and pretended to be at ease, saying, "Your Highness, the reason why His Majesty is doing this is because Li Jinzhong of Khitan and Moki of Turkic Moki have successively used this as an excuse to rebel. His Majesty knows that the hearts of the people and the general trend cannot be disobeyed, so he reinstated the important officials of Li Tang to win the hearts of the people. However, this is only an external cause. Now that the external cause has been resolved, there will be no more wars in the near future. Moreover, although the way the foreign enemies rebel is beneficial to our development, it will inevitably hurt the vitality of the country. Since the external cause cannot be used and should not be used, then why don't we start from the internal cause?" Princess Taiping's eyes brightened, and she leaned forward to ask, What is the internal cause that Dalong mentioned? Chapter 767. Chui Ti raised her voice. I believe that we should go with the times and continue to expand the power of Li Tang's faction. As long as our faction can form the greatest power in the imperial court, His Majesty can only continue to insist on Li Tang as the heir apparent in order to avoid any future chaos. Song Jixuan slightly creased his brow and retorted. Dalong's words are admittedly reasonable, but in reality they won't work. The current situation in the court is that the second Zhang faction, the Prince of Liang's faction, and the Prince of Wei's faction. Moreover, Grandpa Di Yao Chong and Wei Jigu are all loyal to the Prince of Xiang and the Prince of Luling, other than a few diehards who remain neutral. The rest of the court has been divided up by the various factions. What power is there for us to fight for? Princess Taiping nodded. Jixuan is correct. In truth, to this princess, whether they are loyal to the Prince of Xiang or the Prince of Luling, they are all part of my Li Tang faction. No matter which of them is stronger, it is not a problem for this princess. The problem is that even if we combine the strength of the three factions, it is still not enough to contend against the second Zhang and the second Wu. Wei Silly of the Phoenix Pavilion immediately sternly said, Princess is mistaken. It is precisely because we are weak that we must combine. Princess wholeheartedly considers the Tang dynasty, but the Prince of Xiang's faction and the Luling faction each have their own selfish motives. How can they work together? Princess cannot give up on those who can fight, even if the Prince of Xiang's faction and the Luling faction are working hard. Chui Ti also said correct. In the end, it is better to hold power in the hands of others than to hold it in one's own hands. Although some people are loyal to Li Tang, it is difficult to guarantee that they do not have their own selfish desires. Only Princess, as a member of Li Tang's imperial clan, will always consider the empire. Thus, even if the Prince of Xiang's faction and the Luling faction are interested in someone, we cannot let go. We must fight for what we should. Princess Taiping nodded in understanding. Taiping has learned. This princess was only worried that if we participated in the struggle, the second Zhang and the second Wu would benefit from it. But what the two of you said is not without reason. In order to avoid internal strife before the great undertaking is accomplished, this princess will not easily give up. With Princess Taiping's clear stance, Chui Ti finally returned to the main topic. Since the power of the court has already been divided, why don't we take a different path and start elsewhere? If we bring in fresh water, inject new blood, and try our best to recruit the princess, won't we be able to break the current stalemate? Wei Silly was displeased. Dalong, he said, don't keep us guessing. Why don't you tell me? How do we draw in the running water? Chui Ti said, ever since the Empress ascended to the throne, she has used the Wu clan's princes and son-in-law as the chancellor of the universities. Most of these people are frivolous and uncultured, and the professors and teaching assistants are mostly friends and relatives. These people do not do proper work, and in the last 10 years, all the schools in the capital have been abandoned. Now, the children of nobles, dukes, and ministers no longer had to go through the imperial examinations. They could only enter the government through recommendation. However, in the past few years, the Wu clan had been monopolizing power. Those who were recommended to become officials were either Wu clan disciples or people attached to the Wu clan. If we can remonstrate to the emperor and reform the country, forbidding the children of officials from becoming officials without passing the imperial examinations, then Chui Ti didn't say anything else. She just smiled and looked at everyone. Song Jixuan stroked his beard and pondered for a moment. Then he nodded and said, I think this plan is feasible. The children of the ministers have a strict family education. Even if they don't go to school, they still study diligently. They can't be compared to the children of the new noble families. If we put an end to their path of recommendation and let them take the path of the imperial examinations with their talents and knowledge, most of the people who can become officials will be the children of the old officials. If we can plan ahead and seize the position of chancellor and doctor, these disciples of the emperor will naturally become our people. Princess Taiping's spirit was lifted. However, she thought about it and felt that this plan was not meticulous enough. She said, "This is a good idea, but there is a problem," before Princess Taiping could continue. The steward Li Yi quietly walked in and interrupted her. Li Yi whispered a few words to Princess Taiping. Princess Taiping's eyes suddenly lit up like a pair of bright stars in the night sky. Erling is back. Princess Taiping's heart was filled with joy. She couldn't wait to grow wings and fly to Yongfan's side. However, when she looked at the disciples in front of her who were discussing matters, the burning passion in Princess Taiping's heart faded. She forcibly suppressed the impulse in her heart and nodded lightly, indicating that she already knew. After Li Yi bowed and left, Princess Taiping turned to the crowd and said, "Let's continue. I am worried that with the shrewdness of the queen, once this plan is presented, the queen will definitely find out the mystery in it. If the queen finds out that we have ulterior motives, she will definitely not agree." Wei Silly thought about it and suggested, "I have an idea. We can find another topic as the subject of the remonstrance to attract the emperor's attention. We can put the reorganization of the country as an insignificant matter. In this way, we can hide our real intention. Even if the emperor does not agree with the first matter, it will be easy for him to nod his head on the second matter." The emperor had the heart of the emperor, the high officials had the means to control their subordinates, and the servants naturally had their intelligence and wisdom. What Wei Silly said was some of the methods that the lower officials and officials had explored in order to get their political remonstrance approved. Princess Taiping nodded to show her approval. She then looked at the crowd with hope and said, "So what matter can we use as a cover?" Chui Ti clapped his hands and said excitedly, "I have a plan." Princess Taiping's pair of beautiful eyes immediately fixed on him and said happily, "Dalong, please speak." Chui Ti said, "Since the fall of the gong, the officials and their relatives who were framed by Zhou Xing, Lai Junqin, and the other cruel officials have been homeless and have not been forgiven. Now that these cruel officials have fallen from power, it has been found out that they were wronged during their term of office. We can use this reason to request the court to reinvestigate this case and win the hearts of the people. As for the reorganization of the country, we can attach this matter to this. I believe that whether it is the emperor or the court, they will only be concerned about the first matter." Princess Taiping clapped her hands and laughed. "Dalong's plan is really good. It is decided. Silly, I will leave this matter to you." Taiping was really happy at this moment and felt very fulfilled. When she was a young girl, her biggest pursuit was to find an ideal husband, to grow old together, to be able to raise her eyebrows. After the painful experience of Xue Xiao's death, the persecution of Li Tang's imperial family, and her own painful experience of marriage, the beautiful and pure wish of her young girl had been shattered. Taiping was no longer as naive as before. The appearance of Yongfan was a new sustenance for her drifting love. If she could marry Yongfan, become his wife, and bear his children, perhaps the focus of her life would return to the biggest dream of her young girl. But to her, this was undoubtedly an extravagant hope. Although her sincerity had finally won the love of her sweetheart, her marriage had already been ruined and she could not get rid of it. Love is not the whole of life for anyone. She could not marry the person she loved, and her family and children could not become the focus of her life. Taiping, who was trapped in depression, had now finally found another sustenance. She fought wits with others and studied strategies. Although she was not in the imperial court, she could quietly influence everything in the imperial court. Power was a kind of poison that made people feel like they were in heaven. Once they tasted it, few could resist its temptation. Sometimes she could not help but think, if she had more power, if her powerful mother was no longer here, what would have happened? If the young Wu Zetian had not entered the palace but married an ordinary rich family, what would have happened? Perhaps she would have managed the farmland in the countryside and the shops in the city well, but in the end, she was nothing more than a shrewd housewife. There were countless doors in life, and countless paths behind each door. Every door that was pushed open, and every path that was taken led to an unpredictable future. Alang. These were sent today. The guard commander, Rinwei, was holding a thick stack of documents and was about to introduce to Yang Fan what he needed to review when Yang Fan said with a straight face, "I just came back and am tired. Let's talk about it tomorrow." Yes. Ren Wei agreed, and Yang Fan walked away with a steady, grandfatherly gait. Rin Wei walked back along the gravel path and bypassed a few clumps of bamboo. Suddenly, he saw a girl standing gracefully in front of a rockery, staring blankly at a cluster of blooming flowers. Rin Wei stopped and greeted her with a smile. "Miss Gu, aren't you going to rest?" Gu Zhuting looked up at the bright red sky and asked curiously, "It's not dark yet. How can you sleep so early? What are you doing?" Ren Wei said, "I brought some things for Ah Lang to look over, but he said he was tired from the long journey and needed to rest tonight." Ah Lang is tired from the long journey, but Miss Gu, as a woman, is still full of energy. Gu Zhuting rolled her eyes at him and snappily said, You really are a blind idiot." Watching Gu Zhuting's slender figure floating away, Ren Wei thought for a long time, but still couldn't figure out how he was an idiot. Gu Zhuting walked out of the garden and came to the side of the small bridge in the side courtyard. She couldn't help but turn her head to look at the vermilion cornice in the corner of the dense green not far away. She suddenly remembered the scene when she hugged Yang Fan and slept in the yurts of the Turks and on the eastbound Lillet carriage. At that time, she was cold and tired and numb, so she didn't feel anything. But now that she thought about it, her heart was shaken. The night breeze gently ruffled the lotus leaves on the surface of the water and also disturbed her heart. Her cheeks became hot and a certain part of her body produced an indescribable feeling. She suddenly missed that man's embrace and his snoring. With his hands behind his back, Yang Fan staggered into the rear courtyard. Seeing that there was no one around, he suddenly smiled and dashed toward Xiao Man's residence. Alang, Tao Mei and third sister, who were sitting and chatting under the grape trellis, saw their male master and quickly got up to greet him. Yang Fan didn't expect that there were two people under the grape trellis. He quickly stabilized his body and smiled kindly at them. "Oh, it's Tao Mei and third sister. People say that a girl changes 18 times between womanhood and womanhood. It's really true. I haven't seen you for half a year, and you've already grown into a young lady. Ha ha ha." Tao Mei and third sister looked at each other with a strange expression. This brother in front of them had a smooth chin, not to mention white hair. He didn't even have a strand of beard. It was really difficult for him to act like an elder. Yang Fan coughed twice and waved his hand awkwardly. "It's okay, you two can go rest." The two little girls inexplicably left. Yang Fan peeped at them from the corner of his eyes. As soon as the two girls turned around the flowers, he rubbed his hands anxiously like an old ape stealing peaches. He bent his waist and shoulders, dropped his hands in front of him, tiptoed, and sneaked into the bedroom. Chapter 768. Yang Fan sneaked into the room like a thief and looked around. He saw that the hall was empty and there was no one there. Yang Fan quickly turned around and closed the door. He twisted his waist and rushed into the bedroom. As soon as his body flashed past the screen, his eyes were wide open. The bronze lamp tree that Ma Gu used to offer birthday gifts brightly illuminated the room. Xiao Man was already lying on the couch. The brocade quilt reached her chest, only revealing two snow-white and smooth shoulders. There was a thin red string on her shoulders. She was only wearing a doo-doo. Suddenly seeing Yang Fan sneak in like a thief, Xiao Man suddenly opened a pair of big watery eyes and looked at him strangely. "Ha! Xiao Man knows me well. After all, we grew up together. A newt doesn't have this kind of self-awareness." Seeing this, Yang Fan was overjoyed and said with a smile, My wife is really tactful. So you've been waiting for me here for a long time. As soon as Yang Fan's voice fell, a small head popped out from the brocade quilt. She looked at Yang Fan in surprise and said in a childish voice, "Daddy!" Yang Fan's hand that was reaching for the brocade quilt suddenly stopped in the air. He said in surprise, "Sirong?" Then another small head popped out from the other side of Xiao Man's body and said in surprise, "Zhang Zai!" Then he opened his mouth and laughed happily. "Zhang Zai also came, catch the lost!" Ah! Yang Fan's mouth opened so wide that 2 eggs could be stuffed in one mouth. He said, Why are you 2 little fellows here?" Yang Nianzu laughed heartlessly and said, "Listening to Mother's story, catch the lost." Yang Fan dejectedly drooped his head. Xiao Man saw the change in Yang Fan's expression and suddenly giggled. She looked at him with her watery eyes and her cheeks blushed shyly. That kind of charming young woman's beauty, coupled with her snow-white skin, was really boundless. Sirong stared at Yang Fan warily with her big eyes and said, "Father, what are you doing here?" Yang Fan stuttered, "It's getting late. I'm going to sleep." "No, Mother wants to sleep with me." Sirong immediately hugged Xiao Man's neck. On the other side, Nian Zhu also rushed to hug Xiao Man and raised his chin proudly, declaring their territorial sovereignty to Yang Fan. Yang Fan explained to his children without much confidence, "But I slept here in the first place. You 2 little rascals. Haven't you been sleeping with the wet nurse?" Sirong glanced at him disdainfully, then proudly raised her head and said, "I've been weaned a long time ago." "Yes, I'm weaned." Nian Zhu nodded vigorously. Yang Fan smiled bitterly and sat down on the couch. He thought hard and decided to solve the territorial dispute through negotiation. He patiently said, "Pa and Anyang should sleep together. That's how it used to be. Later, when Father went to war, Mother brought you here. Now that Father is back, you should go back to sleep with the wet nurse." Sirong's big black eyes turned and she said doubtfully, "You're lying." "How come I don't know?" Yang Fan said, "You 2 were still young at that time. Of course you don't remember." Sirong thought for a moment and hugged Xiao Man's neck a little tighter. She said, coquettishly, "I don't care. I want to sleep with Mother." Nian Zhu responded like a fart, "Me too?" "Me too." Yang Fan coaxed in a low voice, "You 2 have to be good. If you listen to me, Father will take you to Nan City to play tomorrow. I'll buy you a lot of delicious food and fun things to play with." Nian Zhu swallowed and looked at Sirong. Sirong glared at him and said, "Big idiot, Mother can also buy it for us." Nian Zhu suddenly realized and immediately expressed his position, "I won't trade." Seeing that the soft approach didn't work, he could only use the hard approach. Yang Fan glared and said fiercely, "If you dare to be disobedient, do you believe that I won't spank your buttocks into 2 pieces?" Nian Zhu pointed at him and laughed. "Zizui is a big idiot. Buttocks are 2 pieces to begin with." Yang Fan was very discouraged. Xiao Man, who had been laughing and watching the father and son fight, held back her laughter and said, All right. Rong Rong, be good. Xiao Bao, be good too. Father is back and wants to have a private talk with Mother. You 2 mischievous little things, sleep with the wet nurse tonight. Otherwise, Father will be angry and leave again tomorrow." Yang Sarong and Yang Nianzu were overjoyed when they heard this. They said, Okay, then let Father go." Yang Fan was very sad when he heard this. "This father of mine is too much of a failure, isn't it?" Xiao Man glanced at him bitterly and said half-truthfully, "See, you are not home all day. Even your daughter and son are not close to you." Yang Fan sighed. He was just pretending to be sad, but at this time he really felt a little sad. He gently touched the teapot lid of Nian Zhu and said sadly, "Yes, Father used to spend too little time with you. In the future, Father must spend more time with you." Sirong was not deceived by the flowery words of the old man. She was still very vigilant and reiterated, "Then we also want to sleep with Mother." Seeing the pitiful look of the old man, Nian Zhu couldn't help but sympathize with him. So he waved his hand generously and pointed to the inner side of his body against the wall and said, "Then let Chang Shui sleep inside." Yang Fan couldn't help but laugh, looking at the pair of lovely children. The idea of being intimate with Xiao Man faded away. Why did they have to leave? It was good for the family to sleep together, hugging a pair of children, talking to them, bragging about how powerful he was on the battlefield, watching them sleep peacefully. That was also a kind of warm happiness. The pervert was reformed into a loving father. He was about to agree when suddenly there was a few light knocks on the screen. Yang Fan turned his head and saw a graceful figure standing outside. Then came the voice of a new cough. "Sister Xiaoman?" "Ah, sister is here." Xiaoman quickly turned over and sat up. She took the clothes from the side of the bed and put them on. Yang Fan looked at Anu, who walked in slowly, and said in surprise, "How did you come in?" Anu winked at him and said, "I walked in." Yang Fan was suddenly speechless. He desperately tried to recall in his mind, "Did I forget to lock the door just now?" Anu didn't pay any more attention to his embarrassing look. Instead, she turned to Xiao Man and said with a smile, "I haven't seen Sarong and Yinzu for a long time. I really miss them. I want them to sleep at my place tonight." Xiao Man blushed and agreed vaguely. No one knew what she was muttering in her throat. Si Rong and Yen Zhu were already a little unfamiliar with Yang Fan. Naturally, they didn't have much feelings for this aunt who used to be very close to them. They immediately said that they wanted to sleep with their mother. Anu rolled her eyes and said with a smile, "Well, when Aunt came back from the north, she brought back a mountain eagle. It's so powerful. If it's trained well, it can stand on my shoulder when I go out. That's majestic. Who wants to see it?" Yang Yinzu immediately climbed out of the bed naked and raised his hand to surrender to Aunt Anu. I'll go sleep with Aunt." Si Rong was also a little tempted, but she was still hesitating while biting her thin cherry lips. Anu said again, "Aunt also brought back a little leopard cat. It's just weaned. It's so small and cute. It falls as soon as it walks. Its hair is black and yellow, like a cute little tiger. Does anyone want to see it?" When Si Rong heard this, her eyes suddenly lit up. The long-faced Arhut at home had been fed by Tao Mei and third sister until it was round and chubby. It couldn't even climb the wall. Si Rong usually wanted to see it, but Xiao Man was worried that the big cat would scratch her, so she didn't allow her to get too close. Now that she heard that there was a cuter little cat, how could she resist? Under the temptation of a new, the two little troublemakers readily let their mother help them put on their clothes. Before they put on their boots, they couldn't wait to jump to the ground and pull Anu's hand to go to her place. Xiao Man blushed and sent Anu away uncomfortably. When she returned to the room, she looked at Yang Fan angrily and said, "Aren't you going to close the door?" Yang Fan quickly turned back and bolted the door. He muttered to himself, "I clearly remember that it's bolted, but is it bolted or not?" When he turned around, the room was empty. Xiao Man had already returned to the bedroom. Yang Fan couldn't help but smile. He knew that Anu must have heard that the two children were used to letting their mother sleep with them, so she specially came to help them. This was probably a repayment for Xiao Man's extremely considerate care for her for the whole afternoon. Anu returned a plum with a peach. Then am I a peach or a plum? Yang Fan thought as he walked around the screen. At first glance, he saw a peach, a honey peach, a round, perky, plump, full peach, wrapped in a scarlet, gauze-like underwear. It was a soul-stirring honey peach. Go to the side." Yang Fan's large hand had just come close to her in a hurry and felt the soft, elastic, fragrant, and smooth feeling when it was slapped away by Xiao Man. Yang Fan said bitterly, "We haven't seen each other for so long. Why are you so cold to me?" Xiao Man didn't turn her head and just said coquettishly, "It's all your fault. I'm going to be teased by Anu this time." Yang Fan suddenly realized and said with a smile, "So it's because of this. What's the big deal?" It's natural for a man and a woman to love. Xiao Man said angrily anyway, I'm so shameless. Yang Fan advised, Oh, you think too much. Will Anu make fun of you? At most, she's joking with you. If she really makes fun of you, I'll let you see her make a fool of herself next time. Humph. There was a hint of sourness in this sweet voice. Seeing that the situation was bad, Yang Fan hurriedly went up to hold her slender waist and said softly by her ear, Nuno, my good Nuno, don't blame me, okay? Isn't it because I miss you too much? Yang Fan called her Nuno. This was a weapon that Xiao Man could never resist. When Yang Fan called her for the first time, Xiao Man's top body recovered its graceful and beautiful curves. As a result, a sparkling and translucent little white goat appeared under the bright candlelight. On the brocade quilt where the mandarin ducks were playing in the water, her two pink buttocks were like peeled eggs, sparkling and moist. Trembling as they leapt out, the love between husband and wife was expressed in different ways at different ages. He and she were both young. Thus, on this spring night, Xiao Man, the delicate flower in the boudoir, was watered by the rain and dew. Her sweet moans were like the most beautiful music, lingering and reverberating for half the night. Early in the morning, Yang Fan, who had been tossing and turning for most of the night, appeared under the flower tree in high spirits with the scabbard in his hand. His sword rustled and lightning flashed as he practiced martial arts. No one knew how he could be as energetic as an animal. Si Rong couldn't walk very well, but she was holding a kitten in her arms. She staggered over and chased after Nianzhu. Suddenly, they saw Yang Fan's sword dance under the tree. The two kids stopped and widened their eyes in surprise. Yang Fan had already seen them coming. In order to set up a good image in front of his babies, Yang Fan was even more spirited. He leaped up and down, and his sword was like a meteor, majestic and awe-inspiring. Finally, he withdrew his sword in a very handsome manner and looked at the two children with a smile. What do you think? Daddy's martial arts are great, right? Si Rong asked curiously, Daddy, can you break a big stone on your chest? Yang Fan was stunned and said no. Nianzhu asked, Can stacking swallow a sword? Yang Fan said, No. Si Rong asked again, Can you put an iron spear on your throat? Yang Fan's voice became smaller and smaller. No. Nianzhu asked, Can you use the golden spear? Yang Fan was speechless. No. The two children curled their lips in disdain. Si Rong patted the kitten's head and said proudly, Xiaomi, Xiaobao, let's go. Yang Fan looked at their staggering backs and held the sword in front of his chest. He wanted to cry, It's not easy to be a father. Chapter 769. The spring sunshine was warm on the body, like a quilt that had just been blanketed with new cotton. It softly covered your naked body, making you yawn and feel sleepy. This was the feeling of the spring breeze intoxicating the tourists. Yang Fan, Anu, and Xiao Man took the two children to the Luo River for a spring outing. Soon, they coincidentally met Shangguan Daiji, who had left the palace to visit his relatives. So the two places were joined together, and the tents were connected. They occupied the most spacious and beautiful place by the Luo River, which had a radius of 2 acres. At such a moment, the two children were the happiest. They stepped on the fine sand with their bare feet, clearly perceiving the world. After only running 2 laps, the little leopard cat, which was as clumsy as them, rolled all over its body, and the 2 little ones were no exception. Xiao Man did not care about them and let them be crazy, because the head of the family, Master Yang, had said that people only had this one childhood in their lives. If the happiness of this period of time was lost, it would be impossible to find it again in the future. They should not always follow the ideas of the adults and act like little old men. The encampment was set up by the Luo River. The family dug a small and winding ditch to bring in the clear river water, but there were no wine cups floating on the surface of the water. There was also a pitcher on the sand, which was the favorite activity of Xiao Man and Anu. They were throwing arrows in high spirits. The two of them could not play the kind of poetry game that Princess Taiping liked, but this pot was different. The pot was placed far away, and ordinary people could not throw it in. The two women were competing with their wrist strength and eyesight. They threw the pot with enough strength to use the arrow as a hidden weapon. In the depths of the tents, there was a roll of grayish-yellow camel felt. The camel felt pressed down on a patch of wild grass, and the smell of grass wafted out. Sitting on the felt, one could clearly smell the fragrance of grass, and facing the fresh wind from the river, it was very comfortable. Warner smiled and looked at Xiaoman, who had just lost an arrow and was drinking. She then looked at the two little guys who were playing like crazy. Her eyes were full of envy. She had been living in the palace since she was a child, and she had lived by the face of others since she was a child. For her, the most extravagant hope was to live a carefree life like this. What she longed for the most was a family that belonged to her. But all of this could not be realized. Although she was sitting here and had obtained the approval of this family, she was still not a member of this family. "Have you seen Taiping?" Warner withdrew her infatuated gaze and gently glanced at Yang Fan beside her. Yang Fan shook his head slightly. "I just came back yesterday. I haven't seen her yet." Warner asked, "She didn't come looking for you?" Yang Fan narrowed his eyes and asked, "What happened?" Warner smiled gently, as beautiful as a spring flower. "Nothing much. It's just that Wei Si, the renunciant of the Phoenix Pavilion, is preparing to present a memorial." Yang Fan understood what Warner was implying. He said without batting an eyelid, "Oh, this person is Taiping's man?" Warner sweetly said, "All the memorials in the world must go through my hands. Once or twice may be a coincidence, but after a few times it is not hard to guess who he is." Yang Fan smiled and said, "Fortunately, the emperor is old and does not have the energy to pay attention to these details." Otherwise, Warner heard a hint of mockery in Yang Fan's voice, but she did not know who he was mocking. Her eyes flashed, and she said, "The memorial he is going to present is to ask the emperor to redress the cases that have been falsely accused by Lai Junqin, Zhou Xing, and the others. Those who are still alive will be reinstated, and those who are dead will be pardoned, and their families will be allowed to return home." Yang Fan decisively said, "That is impossible. The cases were handled by Zhou Xing, Lai Junqin, and the others, but the real mastermind behind the scenes is His Majesty. The reason why many people were punished was not because they were falsely accused, but because the emperor wanted to kick them away and trample them to death." Wana smiled. She looked like she had the pearl of wisdom in her hands. She was like Guanyin, who was serving in front of Buddha. "There is one more thing attached to this memorial. It asks the emperor to reorganize the country and forbid the children of the rich and powerful to enter the government without passing the imperial examinations." Yang Fan was startled and laughed involuntarily. He said, "In that case, that was just used to bargain with the emperor. This is their real goal." Yang Fan thought for a moment and suddenly understood. He said, "I understand now. Does Taiping not understand the principle of more haste, less speed?" Warner leisurely said, "Perhaps it is not that he does not understand. It is just that when he is in a hurry to get something, it is not easy to control." Yang Fan frowned and worriedly said, "You saw through her goal with one glance. Can this trick be hidden from the emperor?" Warner pouted and playfully rolled her eyes at him. She said, "What are you saying? What do you mean I saw through her goal with one glance? Do you think I am stupid?" Yang Fan smiled and said, "How can that be? My Warner is the smartest. I just think that although the emperor is old, he is not so easy to fool." Warner slapped away Yang Fan's unruly hand. She pouted at Yang Nianzu and Yang Sarong, who were chasing the kitten on the beach. "There are children here." Yang Fan said, unamused, "They are so young. What do they know?" Warner did not pay attention to this shameless man and continued, "This memorial to the emperor, of course, it is not so simple. The reason why I know is not because I can see through it. It is because Taiping took the initiative to tell me. It is because she needs my help. Yang Fan slightly narrowed his eyes. From this sentence, he suddenly felt something different. Princess Taiping wanted this memorial to be approved. So she had to be honest with Waner? Because she needed Waner's help? That was to say, Shangguan Waner was no longer the carefree Shangguan Waner of the past, who could only compose poems with a group of officials in the Hall of History. She could now influence, or even influence the issuance or veto of some government decrees. She must have grasped a considerable amount of power, and Princess Taiping turned her goal to expand her power to the National Academy. This meant that she had drawn a considerable amount of power in the court. Otherwise, even if the emperor was willing to reorganize the government academy, she would only be helping others. She did not have enough manpower and power, so she could not control those positions in the National Academy. At the same time, this also meant that the power in the court had been divided up. There were no new resources to be discovered. Second Zhang's party, Liang's party, Wei's party, Xiang's party, Luling's party, Taiping's party, and Waner's party. After Yang Fan came back from Hebei, he decided to develop a power that completely belonged to him. Only in this way could he command it easily. However, he suddenly discovered that the court was already filled with cliques. Everything had already been divided up, and not even a scrap was left for him. Fortunately, his target was the army. Apart from the Wu clan, there weren't many people who could get their hands on the army. Moreover, what he wanted was a force that could overcome 1,000 with little effort, a force that was at the core of the army. Otherwise, with so many strong competitors competing, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to obtain anything. In fact, there was one thing that Yang Fan did not think about, or perhaps he did not want to think about it. I wanted to give him a hint, but seeing him deep in thought, she swallowed the words that were on the tip of her tongue. Some things, even if they were the way they were when they came out of her mouth, it was hard to avoid having a different taste. She was a smart woman. She knew what should be said and what should not be said. "What are you going to do?" Yang Fan pondered for a while. Then he slowly turned to and said, "Are you going to help her?" Er's clear eyes stared at him. She said word by word, "I said it because I listened to you. Otherwise, why do you think I built my own power?" Yang Fan's heart warmed. He gently held her hands. This time, Waner did not avoid it. Their 4 hands held together. It was as if their hearts were fused together. They could clearly feel each other's heartbeat. This was a very strange feeling. The two of them quietly felt each other for a long time. Then, Yang Fan reluctantly broke this peace of knowing and relying on each other. He said, "Don't get involved. The Son of Heaven is old. Although her energy is not as good as before, she is not muddle-headed to that point. With her tough personality, even if she is willing to do something, she still does not want to be influenced by others. She likes to be in control of everything." meekly nodded. She softly smiled and said, "You do not need to explain so much to me. You only need to tell me if it is okay or not. I am your woman. You are my husband. You are also my heaven. If I don't listen to my own man, who else can I listen to?" Yang Fan was moved by her words. He could not help but want to hug her. But this time, she shyly pushed him away. Women were born politicians. There were some things that she could do, but she would not let others see it. She raised her hand and elegantly swept a lock of hair behind her ear. She smiled and said, "But I actually think so too. I did not expect Lang Jun to have such a clear understanding of His Majesty's temperament. Although Taiping is His Majesty's daughter, she does not understand her mother as well as Lang Jun." Yang Fan smiled and did not answer. He could understand Wu Zetian's thoughts so clearly. Part of it was the analysis of the old guys in the Sky Observation Division, but there was also his own understanding. It was said that the person who understood you the most was not your friend, but your enemy. Perhaps Yang Fan had long regarded Wu Zetian as his strongest opponent. Waner said, "Then let's forget about this matter. I will advise her not to act rashly. If she insists on doing things her own way, then there is nothing I can do." Yang Fan nodded. Wan sighed and said, "Lang Jun, now that you have returned, what are your plans for the future?" Yang Fan said, "I want to return to the 100 Cavalry." Wan's eyes suddenly brightened. She said happily, "Return to the 100 Cavalry? That's great. If Lang Jun returns to the army, you can avoid the dangerous and unpredictable political storms." Yang Fan looked at her with a mischievous smile and said, "There are no other benefits?" Wan's pretty face blushed. She shyly lowered her head and said, "And I can see Lang Jun often." Yang Fan suddenly became distressed and said, "The rules in the palace are very strict. I can see but not eat. What should I do?" "Go to hell." Wan blushed and spat at him. She said with slight annoyance, "Do you think I am a slut?" She gently lowered her head and bent her slender, jade-like neck. She was like a white swan looking at herself in the water, and also like a water lotus shyly lowering its head. She affectionately said, "As long as I can see your face and hear your voice often, I will be satisfied." Chapter 770. This spring outing didn't end until the wind blowing from the river brought a hint of the coolness of the night. Xiaoman and Anu were drunk, while Ninzu and Sirong laughed and danced for a whole day. They both held the kitten covered in sand and lay on the soft quilt. The old bull pulled the carriage, and they fell asleep contentedly. Wan's convoy left a moment earlier than the Yang families. Perhaps the first thing Wan prepared to do when she returned was to wash up and wait for her Longjuan's rendezvous tonight. This kind of anticipation always made people feel endless joy. When Yang Fan's convoy returned to the gate of the mansion, the color of dusk had just dyed the sky. Under the lintel, in front of the clean steps and the bright mirror-like door, stood a tall young man in the clothes of an eunuch. He was holding a horsetail whisk and looking into the distance. Below the steps, there were 4 horses with glossy hair. In front of each horse stood an imperial guard as straight as a spear. In the distance, a convoy slowly drove over. After being pointed out by Mo Xuanfei, the eldest son of the Yang family, he knew that it was Yang Fan's convoy. The eunuch couldn't wait to greet them. "Gao Lisher greets elder brother." Before he reached the carriage, the tall eunuch stopped and happily saluted the carriage in front of him. In the carriage, Yang Fan had already received Run Wei's report. He stopped the carriage and rolled up the bamboo curtain in front of the carriage. "Ah, Brother Lisher." Yang Fan hurriedly jumped out of the carriage and quickly stepped forward to hold his hand. He said affectionately, "Lisher, why are you here? You should have told me in advance, so I could wait for you at home." Gao Lisher said, "I dare not trouble elder brother. Lisher is here on His Majesty's orders to summon elder brother to the palace." Yang Fan looked at the sky and asked curiously, "Now?" Gao Lisher said, "Yes. Strongman has also just arrived. I heard that elder brother has gone out with your family. Seeing that it's almost time for them to return, I didn't go out to look for them. I don't want to get lost with elder brother again. Elder brother, please follow Strongman back to the palace so that His Majesty won't have to wait for too long." Yang Fan agreed and hurriedly made some arrangements for his family. He asked Anu and the others to return to the residence first, while he rode a horse and left with Gao Lisher. This time, it was inconvenient for him to bring the guards. On the way, Yang Fan asked, "Why did His Majesty summon me in such a hurry?" Gao Lisher said, "This little brother really doesn't know." Yang Fan asked, "How is His Majesty feeling?" Gao Lisher thought for a moment and said, "I don't see any great joy or worry on your Majesty's face. Oh yes, before this, His Majesty first summoned Jisoo, the Deputy Prime Minister of the Imperial Censor, and then issued an edict to summon elder brother." Hearing this, Yang Fan frowned slightly. Ever since Lai Junchen's death, Ji-Su had been placed in an important position. Presently, he was already the deputy prime minister of the imperial censor, replacing Li Junshin's previous position. It looked like the empress wanted to mold him into a second Li Junshin to act as her eyes and ears. The only duty of the imperial censor was to report people. The emperor had first seen Ji-Su, and then urgently summoned Yang Fan. This was not a good sign. However, no matter how Yang Fan thought about it, he couldn't think of any conflict between him and Ji-Su, or any weakness that Ji-Su could use against him. Gao Lisher saw that Yang Fan's expression was slightly serious and couldn't help but ask, "Is there something on elder brother's mind? Should we find an excuse to temporarily hide? When Lisher returns to the palace, we'll say that we haven't found elder brother, and that elder brother will show himself after we understand what has happened." Yang Fan shook his head and turned his head slightly. He glanced sideways at the 4 guards not far away and clapped Gao Lisher's shoulder. "That's not appropriate. If His Majesty is moved, he can summon these 4 guards to see him, and he'll know what's going on once he asks. It doesn't matter. If it's a blessing, it's not a calamity. If it's a calamity, we can't avoid it. I'll just enter the palace and find out." In order to not make Gao Lisher worry for him, Yang Fan smiled and changed the topic. He asked, "How are you and your sister doing?" Gao Lisher became happy and said, "Thanks to elder brother's help, Lisher and my sister are living very well. Elder sister is learning singing from Master Rume and is highly regarded by her. Elder sister has liked singing since she was young and lived very happily there. In the palace, I have my adoptive father and Shangguan to take care of me, and no one dares to bully me. Now, I travel in front of the emperor and have a very good relationship with the imperial grandchildren in the Eastern Palace." Yang Fan was very pleased to hear this. Although this ill-fated son of a provincial governor had become a eunuch, he had already been castrated before he entered the palace. Only in the palace would he be less discriminated against. For him to have such an ending was not a bad result. Although the people who killed his parents were the cruel officials under Li Junshin's command, the true culprit was the current emperor. However, this young man, who dared to use a sharpened stone to assassinate an imperial envoy to avenge his father at the age of 10, now took pride in serving in front of the emperor and did not have the slightest awareness of becoming enemies with Wu Zetian. Perhaps in the eyes of the Tang people, this was a matter of course. But in the eyes of someone like Yang Fan, who had grown up in the southeast and did not have such serious thoughts about imperial power, he couldn't help but sigh to himself. In the Martial Achievement Palace, Wu Zetian was leaning back on her throne. Her back was cushioned with a thick velvet cushion, and she seemed to be asleep. Only her eyes, which were under her relaxed eyelids, would move from time to time, indicating that she was awake and thinking about something. This afternoon, after playing for a while with Yiji and Changzong, the 2 pretty men suddenly took a roundabout way to talk about the issue of choosing the heir apparent. They repeatedly tried to persuade her to make her son the heir apparent. Although Wu Zetian was old and had little energy, she was not so old that she was muddle-headed. She immediately questioned the 2 men. How could this pair of youths resist Wu Zetian's questioning? They could only obediently admit that they had been persuaded by Ji-Su. Ji-Su was now Wu Zetian's favorite official. She wanted to cultivate him as a trusted aide like Li Junshin. Thus, he had a close relationship with heir Zhang and often visited them. During one of the banquets, the 2 Zhangs occasionally talked about how the emperor was greatly disappointed with the Wu family's descendants and seemed to intend to re-establish the Li Tang imperial family as the crown prince. Ji Rui said to them, "The Wulong and the Lulang are so honored, not because they have made great contributions to the imperial court, but because there are so many people in the world who are jealous of your wealth. Without great contributions to the world, what will you use to protect yourselves?" These words hit heir Zhang's sore spot. The 2 immediately asked Ji-Su. Ji-Su said, "Looking at the current situation, although His Majesty has ruled for a long time, the world still hasn't forgotten Li Tang's kindness. Thus, They all hope that after His Majesty passes away, Li Tang's descendants will still rule the world. If you can persuade His Majesty to make Li Tang the heir apparent, you'll have made a great contribution and will be guaranteed wealth. Heir Zhang deeply agreed, so he suggested to the Empress. Actually, Wu Zetian already had the idea of making Li Tang the heir apparent. Now that Heir Zhang and Ji Su had the same idea, she was even more determined, because she knew very well that Heir Zhang relied on her for everything and was completely loyal to her. Ji Su was originally a county officer in Chang, and it was all because of her promotion that he could achieve today. Ji Su didn't have any foundation in the imperial court, but now he could become the deputy minister of the imperial censor. If he wanted a stable future, he could only rely on her. These people couldn't possibly have any disloyalty towards her, but they all agreed that Li Tang's son should be the heir apparent, the hearts of the world. Wu Zetian thought for a long time, then specially called Ji Su over to ask him in detail. Ji Su told Wu Zetian about the pros and cons. Wu Zetian was very receptive to the words of her trusted aides. She had already made up her mind, and now she finally made a decision. It was almost dusk, yet she came to the Martial Achievement Hall. This was unprecedented in the Wu Zhou dynasty. Only the inner guards guarded the surroundings of the Martial Achievement Hall. Everyone else was kept out. No one was allowed to approach even half a step, and anyone who disobeyed would be killed without question. Yang Fan followed Gao Lisher to the Martial Achievement Hall. Just as he arrived in front of the hall, 2 female guards flashed out from the darkness and said in a low voice, "Stop! Only Yang Fan is allowed to enter." Gao Lisher bowed and said with a smile, "Greetings, Big Sistering, Big Sister Qing." They were Gao Ying and Lan Yiqing. 2 valiant women in martial attire walked up with a straight face. Yang Fan smiled and said, "Long time no see, you too." The 2 pretty girls didn't strike up a conversation with him. 2 pairs of jade hands touched his body, searching him from top to bottom. Seeing that he wasn't carrying any weapons, they waved their hands and said in a cold and dignified voice, "Follow me." Yang Fan looked at Gao Lisher in surprise. He followed behind the 2 long-legged beauties, admiring their leisurely swaying waists, and stepped into the main door of the Martial Achievement Hall. This was only the first door, but Yang Fan discovered that other than the guards in the open, there were many more guards patrolling in the dark. No wonder Gao Ying and Lan Yiqing didn't pretend to be polite to him. Among these guards in the open and in the dark, there must be their immediate superiors. Further in, the second door was even more tightly guarded, and there were many people moving about. Yang Fan was secretly vigilant, but he changed his mind. If the emperor wanted to kill someone, even if it was the prime minister, he would have already sent an imperial edict to the prison. There was no reason to bring him to the emperor. Moreover, with his identity and status, if the emperor was determined to harm him, he wouldn't need to summon him into the palace at all. Yang Fan's expression also became serious. He followed behind the 2 young beauties and silently stepped into the third door. It wasn't until they reached the front of the hall that Gao Ying and Lan Yiqing stopped. They turned to the left and right and gestured to Yang Fan, saying, "Go in, His Majesty is waiting for you." Only then did the 2 girls cast a concerned and complicated look at Yang Fan. But because they couldn't speak, the things that could be said with just a look was really limited. Yang Fan seemed to understand something, but it seemed like he didn't catch anything. So he could only muddle his head and step into the hall, shouting loudly, "Subject, Yang Fan, under His Majesty's verbal order, has an audience. Come in." A dignified voice came from the hall. Yang Fan answered and stepped in. When he looked up, he saw Wu Zetian sitting majestically behind the table like a Buddha. The entire hall was empty, and there was no one else in sight. There was only the copper-red crowned cranes on both sides of the table spitting out green smoke. Yang Fan didn't dare to look too long. He hurriedly bowed and said, "Subject Yang Fan greets His Majesty." Chapter 771. Wu Zetian sternly said, "Yang Fan, Your subject is here. I heard that you have an ambiguous relationship with Taiping. Is this true? Yang Fan was stunned and raised his head in shock. A figure flashed behind the curtain, and a beautiful woman slowly walked out. She was dressed in a light yellow palace dress. She had bright eyes and white teeth, but there was a murderous look on her jade-like face. Yang Fan took a closer look and recognized that it was Fu Qingqing, the female official of the palace. Fu Qingqing raised her hands, and her sleeves hung down, revealing a pair of white wrists. She clapped her hands 3 times, and immediately 6 women in snow-white martial attire flashed out from behind the 6 pillars. Each of them looked valiant and charming. Lan Yiqing and Gao Ying were also among them, and each of them held a sharp sword in their hands. "How dare you?" Wu Zetian slammed the table and stood up. "You dare to mess with my daughter, ruining my royal family's reputation and ruining my dignity. You are a traitor and deserve to die. Kill him for me." When the 6 women heard this, the swords in their hands flashed, and in an instant the 6 of them formed a small plum blossom-shaped array with Gao Ying as the center of the array. They surrounded Yang Fan, and the 6 sharp swords pointed straight at Yang Fan's vital points. Yang Fan was shocked. He kicked his feet and was about to make a move. In a flash, his eyes met with Fu Qingqing's. He saw the cold expression on Fu Qingqing's jade-like face. Yang Fan felt as if ice water was poured on his head, and he immediately calmed down. However, his reaction was too fast. His feet pushed hard on the ground, and his body had already leaped up. The moment his feet left the ground, Yang Fan's mind turned, and he reacted. His body that was originally in the air suddenly sank forward. The moment his feet left the ground, his whole body sank forward. Bang! He had to kneel down hard. Yang Fan could not deflect the force, and his knees landed firmly on the ground. Yang Fan took the opportunity to bow and shouted, "Your subject deserves to die. Your Majesty, please forgive me." Yang Fan's reaction wasn't slow. In addition, Wu Zetian didn't know martial arts, so how could she tell that Yang Fan had made up his mind to fight? Seeing him kneel down and beg for mercy with such a sincere attitude, not resisting even though there was a sharp blade on his body, she couldn't help but feel satisfied. She snorted heavily and waved her hand. Gao Ying and the other 6 women immediately withdrew their swords and retreated. Gao Ying secretly heaved a sigh of relief and thought, "This idiot, I signaled him when he came in, but he still wanted to resist. Fortunately, he finally thought it through, or it would be difficult." As she was thinking this, she turned around and saw Lan Yiqing, who looked as if a heavy burden had been lifted, quietly stuck out her little tongue at her. Wu Zetian waved her hand and dismissed everyone. Her face was still full of anger. She said to Yang Fan, "If not for your great contribution to the imperial court in the Tubo and Turkic Khaganate, we would have cut you into pieces today and would not let you off lightly." As soon as Yang Fan heard this, he was even more certain and repeatedly admitted his mistake and begged for mercy. Standing behind the imperial table, his cheap mother-in-law, still angry, asked Fu Qingqing to leave. She suddenly heaved a long sigh and slowly sat down. She said, "We know this matter is not entirely your fault. That child Taiping is a bit willful. She is not satisfied with the prince consort that we have arranged for her." Yang Fan lowered his head and did not speak. His eyes darted around, and he only thought in his heart, thanks to Fu Qingqing's glance, "What is the Empress trying to do by doing this?" Wu Zetian rambled on for a while. In the end, it was just that Yang Fan deserved to die. Moreover, he deserved to die with 1,000 cuts, 1,000 arrows piercing his heart, and even if his bones were burnt to ashes, it would not be enough to atone for his crimes. However, after all, he had made great contributions to the imperial court and the country. Moreover, the wise and great Empress was very clear about his illicit relationship with Princess Taiping. Speaking of which, it was difficult for Yang Fan. During the day, he had to serve the imperial court, and at night he had to serve the Empress. the merciful and wise empress, who was clear about rewards and punishments, could not bear to punish him. But he had indeed made a big mistake and put the empress in a difficult position. Yang Fan knelt there like a son-in-law. The more he listened, the more confused he became. What is the empress trying to do? Could it be that she wants Taiping to remarry? Wu Zetian nagged for a while and finally changed the topic, saying, "Now, we have decided to let you atone for your crimes by meritorious deeds and do something important for us. If you do well, we will offset your crimes and pardon you. If you do not do well, you will be punished for both crimes and will not be spared." Yang Fan secretly heaved a sigh of relief. Finally, we have come to the main topic. Yang Fan immediately bowed his head and put on a look of gratitude, saying, "Thank you, Your Majesty, for your great kindness. This subject is willing to atone for my crimes by meritorious deeds. I will not hesitate to go through water and tread on fire." Wu Zetian said in a deep voice, "Yang Fan, raise your head." Yang Fan raised his head with some confusion. Wu Zetian stared at him and said, "We will give you a mission. Go secretly to Fang province and bring Prince of Luling back to the capital." Yang Fan's heart thumped violently and he cried out involuntarily, "Bring Prince of Luling back?" Wu Zetian's face darkened and she said in a cold voice, "What?" Yang Fan was overjoyed, but he did not dare to let Wu Zetian see any clues. He hurriedly lowered his head and said, "Yes, this subject will solemnly obey Your Majesty's decree." Wu Zetian mistook his reaction for what she was worried about. She couldn't help but sternly say, "We know that you have always been close to King Liang. King Liang is our nephew, and you are our subject. We are happy to see that you are close to King Liang, and we do not oppose it. However, you absolutely cannot let King Liang know about this." Yang Fan was somewhat surprised. By now, he had already calmed down from his excitement and raised his head in confusion. Wu Zetian was very satisfied with his current performance and continued to give him pointers. "You should already know why we want to bring Prince of Luling back to the capital, right?" Yang Fan hurriedly said, "This subject does not dare to recklessly try to fathom Your Majesty's intentions." Wu Zetian coldly snorted and said, "Is there even a need to fathom this matter? Anyone who knows our arrangements will understand our intentions. Thus, this matter must be kept absolutely confidential." "Yes," Yang Fan replied. Wu Zetian thought in a daze for a moment, then said, "We do not permit you to reveal this matter to anyone because it is of great importance. None of our nephews wish to see Prince Luling return to the capital. Once they learn of this matter, the consequences will be obvious. That is why we want you to keep this matter absolutely confidential. If Prince Luling does not return to the capital safely, we will definitely kill you." With these last words, Wu Zetian's expression became stern. Yang Fan's heart trembled. He could tell that Wu Zetian was not joking. Although he himself was also the person most willing to bring the Prince of Luling back to the capital, Wu Zetian's threat still made him think it over. Even if it was just to protect his own life, he would still do his utmost. Wu Zetian said, "Neither Prince Yang nor Prince Wei is willing to let Prince Luling return to the capital, and the army is filled with their people. If we leave this matter to them, we can imagine that Prince Luling will definitely be assassinated on the road to Luling, or that Prince Luling will fall ill and die of a sudden illness. Thus, we are extremely cautious. Other than the inner guards, no one else knows that I have summoned you this time. You must also remember that this matter must be handled with extreme caution. Before Luling is brought back to the capital, no one can know of this matter." Yang Fan thought to himself, "It's not just the Prince Liang's faction, the Prince Wei's faction, or even the neutral Wu Yi. If even the Prince Xiang's faction hears of this matter, they will probably try to obstruct us." As Yang Fan thought to himself, he replied, "This subject will solemnly obey the imperial decree." Wu Zetian slowly returned to her seat and loudly called out, "Come!" Lan Yiqing, Gao Ying, and several other female guards suddenly appeared from behind the pillar. Wu Zetian said, "We will assign a few people from the inner guards to you. With our secret edict, they will accompany you to Fangzhou to bring Luling back." Yang Fan involuntarily blurted out, "All women." Lan Yiqing rolled her eyes at him. Wu Zetian said in a deep voice, "We are not senile yet. Of course, we will not just assign a few female guards to you. Are you afraid that others won't find your entourage strange by being so ostentatious? You can choose a few more people from the 100 Cavalry. We can trust the 100 Cavalry, but the great general of the Featherwood Guard is still a nephew of the Wu clan. Therefore, you must do your best to choose a few reliable ones. Moreover, the true purpose of this trip must be concealed even from them. For confidential matters, you only need these guards who know the truth to help you." Yang Fan respectfully acknowledged. Wu Zetian waved her hand, and Fu Qingqing walked to Yang Fan with an imperial edict in her hands. Yang Fan quietly gave her a grateful look and received the secret edict with both hands. Wu Zetian said, "Go and make the arrangements. We have to leave by tomorrow evening at the latest. Remember, if Luling lives, you live. If Luling dies, you die. Yang Fan, you're on your own. Is Lang still busy?" Xiao Man walked to the front of the study and looked at the light in the room. She asked Renwei, who was guarding the door. Renwei respectfully replied, "Yes, madam." Lang entered the study as soon as he came back. Xiao Man was puzzled. "Strange, what is so urgent?" There was a pair of silhouettes reflected in the window. One was obviously Yang Fan, who was gesticulating and saying something. The silhouette on the other side was more beautiful, with long eyelashes, a straight nose, round lips, and beautiful silhouette curves. It was obviously Gu Zhuding. Looking at the two, it was definitely not a messy or private matter. Xiao Man had no choice but to walk slowly. She had thought that her Langjun would accompany Sister Wanner tonight. Unexpectedly, she heard that after he returned to the manor, Xiao Man had used the condition of buying a civet cat for her son and a parrot for her daughter as a condition to send her children to sleep happily with their wet nurses. However, he still did not come after waiting for a long time. After a long time apart, Xiao Man actually wanted to be teased by Anu a few more times. Walking to the back of the house, Xiao Man called third sister and ordered, "Go to the kitchen and tell them to prepare some supper and send it to the study." Third sister answered in a crisp voice. She saw Madame leisurely walking toward the bedroom. Her gait was as if she was in low spirits. On the same night, one who had just received the news from Yang Fan, was wearing a nightgown and standing on the balcony. She looked up at the bright moon in the sky and stared blankly. Wan Er's nature was indifferent. When she was not teased, the fire of lust was not strong. She was not the kind of woman who was eager to have sex. Tonight, Yang Fan could not come over for some reason. She was only disappointed that she could not talk to her lover. Now, she was actually more worried about Yang Fan. She knew that if it was not a very important matter, Yang Fan would not break the appointment. Wanner stood there for a long time. Finally, she sighed and said, "What happened?" Chapter 772. Sect Master, why don't we use a large number of our people? After hearing Yang Fan's explanation, Gu Zhuting creased her slender brows. The panic she had felt when she was alone with Yang Fan had vanished, and she began to seriously consider this operation. Yang Fan explained, "Our strength is scattered, distributed among the various professions, the court, and the common people. Although we can play an enormous role, it's a slow and long-term effect. For this sort of matter, we can only use a group of martial artists, and there aren't many of them. Secondly, our succession hall is not pure. Our people come from the 7 great clans. These people obey my orders, but they all have a true master behind them, the clans they belong to. Even if they won't betray me, it shouldn't be hard to send a message to their clans, right? And although the 7 great clans are united in their opposition to the Zhou dynasty and the Empress, the people they support are different. Some of them want to support the Prince of Xiang, but they won't put all their eggs in one basket. The succession hall is a hodgepodge of the 7 sects and 5 clans. The various clans have many eyes and ears, so the succession hall cannot be used. Otherwise, those people who are determined to support the Prince of Xiang, after paying such a great price, will definitely think of a way to kill the Prince of Luling once they learn that the Empress wants to make the Prince of Luling heir apparent. Since the Empress has already decided to pass the throne to the Prince, once the Prince of Luling is killed, the Prince of Xiang will be the Empress's only choice. They will definitely take this risk. Gu Zhuting silently nodded, knowing that everything Yang Fan said was true. Yang Fan added, "There's also one more thing. I have to bring the internal guards and 100 cavalry with me. If we use too many people, they will assuredly notice. After thinking it over, I feel that rather than using people from the succession hall whose background is unknown, it's better not to bring a single one." Gu Zhuting shot a quick glance at Yang Fan. She said nothing, but her heart was beating like a drum, and she was also rather flustered. "Am I not a person of the succession hall? Sect Master. Sect Master is completely treating me as one of his own. He actually trusts me this much." Yang Fan didn't think so much. In his opinion, the common secret of killing Lu Binmi was enough to make this woman, who used to be a servant of the Cui family in Qinghe, stand by his side loyally forever. Yang Fan said, "Ever since I met with mishap in Hebei, the successor hall has been very nervous. They advised me to resign from my official position. At the same time, they sent people to strengthen my protection. I had no intention of resigning from my official position, at least for now. If I stayed in the officialdom, I would be able to maintain close contact with the various realms and display my usefulness. I ignored this request. Another thing is their personal protection of me. No matter if it's the internal guards or the cavalrymen, there is no lack of outstanding people among them. Their martial arts are not inferior to our succession hall's people. If we let our people follow them, they will soon find out. However, I have no legitimate reason to do so, and I can't avoid them. Therefore, I need your help." Gu Zhuting nodded in understanding. Yang Fan worked almost all night, making detailed arrangements for the successor hall. This trip to Fangzhou would take at most a month. For a huge organization like the successor hall, unless something important happened within a month, as long as Yang Fan gave clear instructions and arranged people to handle the affairs for him, there would be no delay. Of course, he also made precautions in case of emergency, setting up emergency measures and a way to contact in case of an emergency. Yang Fan wrote the above situation in a secret letter. When all the above things were prepared, it was already dawn. Looking at Gu Zhuting, who had fallen asleep on the table, Yang Fan went to the bed behind the screen to take a thin quilt and gently covered her with it. Then he went to the bed and lay quietly, thinking about some details of bringing Prince of Luling back to the capital. Before he knew it, the sky was already bright and the rooster crowed. Yang Fan, who was lying on the bed with his clothes on, got up and quietly walked to the outside of the screen. As soon as the door was opened, the slight creaking sound woke Gu Zhuting up. Yang Fan stopped and smiled at her. "You've worked hard. Go to the bed and rest. I still have some arrangements to make at home. I'll call you when it's time to leave." Gu Zhuting nodded. Watching Yang Fan go out, she gently touched the thin quilt on her shoulder, a sweet smile on her lips. She stood up, stretched her slightly numb body, and slowly walked to the back of the screen. The bed was still warm from Yang Fan's body. Lying on it, Gu Zhuting felt Yang Fan's warmth. Suddenly, she shrunk her head under the quilt and took a deep breath, as if she could smell Yang Fan's scent. With a little shyness and satisfaction, she covered her burning cheeks. Since Wu Zetian began to seize the power of the emperor, countless people wanted to stop her. When she ascended to the throne, countless people wanted to drive her down from the throne. Groups of people sacrificed their lives for this. After countless people's efforts, Wu Zetian, who was at the end of her life, had no energy to continue the war, so she finally compromised. Now was the time to harvest the results, and his own life was also tied to this matter. Yang Fan dared not be careless. He didn't even tell Anu and Xiaoman about the truth of this trip. It was not that he didn't trust them, but he didn't want them to worry. Moreover, there were people from the succession hall in the Yang mansion. This matter involved too many factions. If they knew the truth, it would be bad if they accidentally revealed something. Xiaoman was quite reluctant to leave as soon as she came home, but she heard that he had the emperor's secret order and would be back in a month at most. Xiaoman, who had been a female soldier in the internal guards for many years, no longer complained. She who had been in it certainly understood what it meant to disobey the emperor's order. There was nothing on Anu's side. In the past few months, they had been together. What Yang Fan needed to do now was to repeatedly remind her that she must stay at home obediently and not disguise herself to try to find out his whereabouts. Anu was not someone who didn't know the importance of things. Yang Fan said it very seriously, and knowing that Gu Shishir was accompanying her, Anu obediently agreed. Afterwards, Yang Fan left with Ren Wei and the other guards. Before leaving, he woke Gu Zhuting up and went out together. Gu Zhuting was a woman, so she didn't need to accompany Yang Fan to go out before. This time was really special. However, this was Yang Fan's arrangement, so Ren Wei and the others naturally didn't ask. At this time, the 800th bell in Luoyang City had rung out. The streets were bustling with people. Yang Fan left Fortune Lane and kept walking north. When he reached the Luo River, he turned west and walked towards the Tianjin Bridge. There were many businesses on the riverbank, especially selling all kinds of snacks. The commoners of the nearby villages liked to come here early in the morning to buy some snacks. They were cheap and tasty. To do business here, they mainly relied on repeat customers. If the snacks were not tasty, the stall would have closed long ago. Those who could do business here all had their own unique skills. Nay, a rich aroma came with the wind. Yang Fan suddenly reined in his horse. He turned around and said to Gu Zhuting, "Miss Gu, you haven't had breakfast yet. How about eating a pancake to allay your hunger?" Gu Zhuting, who had been absent-minded the whole time, jumped as if she was startled when he called her name. She didn't understand what he was saying at all. Yang Fan had already jumped off the horse with a smile and walked to the roadside stall. Not long after, he came back with a piping hot hu cake. The outside of the hu cake was wrapped in lotus leaves, but it was still very hot. Yang Fan quickly ran to Gu Zhuting's horse with both hands, smiled, and said, "Quickly catch, it's so hot." Gu Zhuting was at a loss, but when she saw that Yang Fan's hand was so hot, she didn't dare to reach out to take it. She first pulled her hands into her sleeves and rolled up a few layers of sleeves to make sure they were a little thick. Then she took the pancake. Rin Wei was a talkative person. At first, he pretended to be silent in front of Yang Fan, but now he had revealed his true colors. Seeing the scene, he smiled and said, "Ah, Lang, I also haven't had breakfast." "Why didn't you say so earlier?" Yang Fan got on his horse and said, "Go buy it." Ren Wei opened his mouth but couldn't say a word. The other guards laughed. Gu Zhuting saw this scene and couldn't help but feel a sweetness in her heart. The pancakes sold by this shop didn't cut corners at all. A full caddy of mutton was stuffed in between layers of crispy wheat pancakes. The delicious mutton was evenly sprinkled with pepper and fermented black beans, and there was also crispy wine. The aroma of wheat, meat, crispy wine, pepper, and fermented black beans gushed out, making people salivate. Gu Zhuting's heart was filled with sweetness as she ate, but her small mouth was really too small. Facing such a giant Tu Ping, she had no idea where to put her mouth. Even so, she still ate with relish. The pancakes made by this shop are very authentic. When I went out in the past, even if I had already eaten breakfast, I would still buy one. but this pancake is really too big. Generally speaking, if a family buys one and cuts it, it will be enough for 3 people to eat. I can't even eat half of it." As Yang Fan said this, he suddenly saw that half of the pancake in Gu Zhuding's hand had been eaten by that small mouth. He couldn't help but laugh and said, "Miss Gu has a good appetite." Gu Zhuding's pretty face blushed, and she looked a little embarrassed. Yang Fan waved his hand and said with a smile, "You didn't eat breakfast, so of course you are hungry. When I said I can't eat half of it, I was referring to the situation where I had already eaten breakfast." Yang Fan continued to move forward on his horse and boasted for the old man selling the pancakes. "This old man has a pair of wonderful hands and has the ability to turn iron into gold. I heard that he wasn't the only one selling pancakes on this section of the embankment. Later on, a few other pancake sellers competed with him, and he used a saddle and a quiver to make a delicious meal. Those people knew they were inferior and took the initiative to give way. The saddles and quiver of that time were made of bear and deer skin, and inferior ones were made of cowhide and sheepskin. Those were all real leather, and the edible gelatin of the later generations could not compare. They were all natural green real leather, and after cooking the gelatin would thicken and the taste would be not bad." Ah! Gu Zhuting was eating with relish, but when she heard this, her mouth that had just opened suddenly stopped on the crescent shape of the pancake, and she didn't have the courage to bite down. Seeing this, Yang Fan laughed. Don't worry, there is definitely no quiver or saddle in there. Ha ha ha, you can eat without worry." Gu Zhuting looked at Yang Fan, who had succeeded in his prank, and was laughing happily. She rolled her eyes at him. But it was a pity that Yang Fan, who was riding with his whip, was already halfway out of the horse's body, so he didn't see it. Otherwise, such a charming flying white would probably make his body go soft like the pancake in Gu Zhuting's mouth.